Good evening, everyone. Tonight is August 22nd, Planning Board meeting. We do this evening have both our regular meeting where we'll have a public hearing as well as a study session. So we will adjourn at some point this evening from the public hearing and the regular meeting, and then take a 5-minute break to move to the study, the community room for a study session. So just wanted to make everyone aware of that. Okay, Denise.
Do roll call. Chair Elrod.
Here.
Chair Pro Tem Rudnicki.
Here.
Board Member Bolt.
Here.
Board Member Graham.
Here.
Board Member Miles.
Here.
Board Member Samuelson.
Here.
Board Member Corbett.
Present.
Board Member Stallman.
Here.
And Board Member Kruger is absent tonight. And then just a quick announcement. I had missed a staff communication when I was making copies, so it is now available at the table.
Thank you. Okay, as I mentioned on the agenda, this evening we will start with a public hearing, and then we'll adjourn and move to the community room for a study session. Any other changes or comments on the agenda for this evening from the board? No changes. Okay. Next item, minutes to be approved. This is for certification of the August 8th regular meeting. Do I have a motion? Anyone?
Motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Second.
Okay, we'll go ahead and vote on that.
No abstain.
Didn't watch the video?
Didn't watch it on TV.
We have 4 votes for, some members abstaining, I guess.
Yes.
So the motion passes.
Thank you. Okay. Next item, we normally at this time allow public comment for general business items, but we do not have any general business items this evening. So we'll continue to public hearing issue, it's Resolution 15-2016 concerning a planned development overlay for property located at 2679 West Main Street.
Good evening. I'm Andrea Mimnaugh with the planning staff, and the item before you tonight is a resolution to approve a planned development overlay for a development called Littleton Mixed Use, located at 2679 West Main Street. The process for a planned development overlay is that the first application is the planned development overlay, which is approved by the planning board. And the second application that follows it is a site development plan, and that is approved administratively. The location of the project is on the north side of Main Street. It's on the westernmost block of Main Street and almost the last property on that block. You can see it outlined in red, and it is adjacent to Bradford Auto Body on the right and a small retail store on the left there, or the west. Here's an existing view of the property. It was formerly the Valley Feed Store located in the building. I think that closed perhaps about a year ago. And here is an overview of the project. The project is in one building, and it's a mixed-use building. It's about 4 stories tall on the west end of Main Street, and the uses are retail, office, and residential, and it's in the B2 zone district. The purpose of the planned development overlay application is to vary the unobstructed open space requirement and reduce the parking requirement in the B2 zone district. In order to get variations on code requirements, a planned development overlay can be used, and there is criteria for that, and that is that it be a high-quality development, it be compatible with a comprehensive plan, and the downtown design standards and guidelines. And then just a note on the B2 zone district, there is a moratorium in place. This application for PDO and site plan was submitted prior to the adoption of the, not the adoption, but the putting in place of the moratorium by City Council. And so for that reason, it is moving forward, not affected by the moratorium. This is the front elevation of the proposed building. And here you can see that there is storefront at the street level, and then office at the next two, the second and third levels. And then at the fourth level is where the residences would be. The entrance to the building is over on the right. That's the easternmost bay there, and that gives access to all areas of the building. There are also two vertical components of the building. You see the one on the left in the back, that is a stair corridor. The one up at the front of the building is an elevator corridor. The taller stair vertical element is 61 feet in height. The bulk of the building is 53.5 feet, and that smaller vertical element is one foot taller at 54.5 feet. And now here's the color rendering. This is the view from across the street on Main Street. So here you can't see the fourth elevation, the fourth story, but you can see the prominence of the canopy at the third level. This is a wood cedar canopy. It's a prominent feature on the building, as well as that front vertical element for the elevator. The applicant is proposing to use a mix of materials. You see the brick at the first two levels, and then that material that you see up at the elevator shaft and the third story is a metal shingle. Looking west on Main Street, you can see how the red brick wraps around the building, and then the lighter color as it wraps around on the second story is also brick. You can also see from this photograph that there is a parking garage that tucks under the upper stories in the back. And this is an open area, but it will be screened by a black metal screen. And here is the site plan. So as I mentioned, the tuck-in parking and how that works is you see in the darker brown in the lower right corner is where the first story sits on the Main Street front. The lighter brown is where the upper stories extend back to the rear of the property and where that parking tucks in. The vehicle entrance to the site is off of Main Street. There is no alley access for this property. And you can see the parking lot extends all the way to the western portion of the lot. There's a total of 64 spaces, and the landscaping is located primarily around the property lines and also internal to the parking lot. So in some cases, the straight application of zoning requirements may hinder the ability of new development to be compatible with existing development, or may restrict the ability to take advantage of the characteristics of the site. And so for these situations, the developer might opt for a planned development overlay, also known as a PDO. The requested variations must be justified, and the development overall must be found to be high quality, consistent with the downtown design standards and guidelines, and the comprehensive plan. Under this PDO request, the applicant is requesting 4 variations from the zoning code. The first is to reduce the required unobstructed open space requirement. The second is the percentage of unobstructed open space along the public right-of-way. I'll explain that a little bit into the presentation here, what that means. The applicant is also looking at 2 parking requirement variations, and the first is for the overall parking requirement for office and retail uses, reduced by 50%, and then also reduce the parking stall dimensions for standard spaces. This is a shot of the chart that is in your staff report. And what I've done here is to highlight those areas of the chart that relate to the variations that have been requested. So you can see here that the top band highlighted in yellow is the minimum unobstructed open space. And then you can also see further down the parking requirements are addressed there. What I've done is broken this chart up into 3 pieces, top, middle, and third. And I'd like to take just a minute here to explain how the different columns work. The existing B2 zone requirements, the first column, is the column that states what the zoning requirements are in the B2 zone district. The second column over, the proposed B2 PDO zone requirements show which portions of those zoning requirements are requested to be varied. And then the third column is the proposed PDO site plan. And in this PDO, there is a site plan and elevations, and I included this paragraph because many of the variations that are being requested are really intertwined with the site plan itself. And so we've included those as well as the elevations because, of course, you'll be addressing architecture as part of this application as well. And then one quick thing, the site plan that's part of the PDO is distinguished from the site development plan application, which comes later, which is a more detailed and technical analysis of drainage and other aspects that the staff will work on should this application be approved. So here you see the minimum obstructed open space highlighted in yellow. And in the B2 zone district, the requirement is 20% of the overall site will be used for unobstructed open space. And of that 20%, 50% of it will be located adjacent to the public street. So in this case, the adjacent public street is Main Street. So 50% of the 20% or 10% will be up against that right-of-way. The applicant is proposing to provide 12% of the overall site in unobstructed open space. And then 12% adjacent to the public's, or 50% of the 12% adjacent to a public street. And so that is also what is proposed on the site plan if you are to look at it. Some of the other requirements in the B2 zone you see listed here. For example, right at the top, there are primary uses allowed. And in the existing B2 zone district, I refer to the code for that, but the B2 includes uses in addition to office and retail. There are uses such as bars, restaurants, laundry facilities, libraries, a number of different uses. The applicant is not requesting any change to the uses. You see that in the second column over. And then in the third column over, you see what's actually being proposed as part of this plan, which is office, retail, and residential uses. The maximum building height, there is no maximum in the B2 zone district. Under the PDO, that would stay the same. And what's actually being provided or proposed is a 61-foot building at its highest point. This is the second third of that chart. And here you see the floor area ratio. B2 allows 2-to-1 floor area ratio. The applicant is not proposing to change that. That stays at 2-to-1. And what's shown on the site plan that's being submitted is a ratio of 1.3-to-1, so somewhat less than what would be allowed as the maximum. There are no building setbacks in the B2 zone district, and that remains the same. And then parking requirements. This is where we get down to how the parking spaces are calculated. For retail, the B2 zone, in any zone district, retail is 1 space for every 200 square feet of gross floor area. The applicant is requesting to divide that in half, So that is then a ratio of 1 per 400 square feet. And then for office, the code requires 1 per 300. The applicant proposes 1 per 600. Multifamily uses remain the same at 1.5 spaces per unit. And then the applicant, this is their fourth and final request for variation, and that has to do with parking stall dimensions. The regular space in the code is 9 by 20. The applicant proposes to go with a 9 by 18 space. That is a fairly standard, quite standard dimension for a regular space in the Denver metro area. And the compact space would stay the same at 8 by 18. And you can see over on the far column that there would be 49 regular spaces and 15 compact. Okay, and the final portion of this chart goes over parking lot landscaping. The applicant's providing 1% more than the required amount. Residential uses are limited to 50% of the building. The applicant is using 24% of the building for residential uses. And then there is a building stepped height allowance. That's actually from the design guidelines. And the applicant is requesting to encroach 25% into that visible area. Again, that's a design guideline requirement. The downtown design guidelines are applicable to this application, and specifically it's sub-area 5. The next section of the presentation will go through each of the requested variations, and the open space reduction. Again, the B2 zone district requires 20%. Applicant is suggesting that 12% is appropriate for this site. And the staff analysis looked at the design guidelines to justify or not, to take a look at how this is suggested to be done in the downtown historic district. And we have section 5.2.5, objective 3, which is to maintain the continuity of building frontages along Main Street. And the next objective is to generally maintain, reinforce, and extend the existing predominant spatial character of Main Street. So open space is eliminated in the front of the building. The provision of the proposed 12% open space is located along the east, north, and west perimeters, and the reduction seems appropriate. The applicant proposes to reduce the amount of that required open space that's provided along the right-of-way, Main Street in this case. The applicant proposes 20% of the overall 12% will be provided along the right-of-way. And the zoning conflict, as shown in the staff analysis, is actually in conflict with the downtown design standards and guidelines. Section 5.2.5 S1 says that along Main Street, front setbacks shall not be allowed unless determined necessary to align with adjacent historic buildings. In fact, there are no adjacent historic buildings that are in the Main Street Historic District or designated as historic landmarks. And the character of Main Street will be preserved if the street edge is maintained, and so this request seems appropriate. Okay, and on to the parking reduction. As we talked about before, there is a requirement of 1 space per 200 for retail, 1 space for 300 for office space. The applicant would like to reduce that by 50%. And the staff analysis talked a little bit more about in your report, but essentially the proposed reduction is not adequately justified. And staff feels that an underparked development will increase the amount of parking within downtown as drivers look for a place to park because there's no space available in the lot. All right, and then there's the parking stall dimensions. 9 by 20 is the standard in the code with an aisle dimension of 23. The applicant would like to go to 9 by 18 and increase the aisle width to 24. The staff analysis is based on research that a 9 by 18 parking stall provides sufficient length and width for most vehicles. And it does appear appropriate to allow 2 feet less in length for parking stalls in order to accommodate wider drive aisles. All right, this next section of the report moves into compatibility with the downtown design standards and guidelines. And the proposed development does appear to be consistent with the following design standards and guidelines. And the first is that buildings shall be designed to provide human scale, interest, and variety while maintaining an overall sense of relationship with adjoining or nearby buildings, and to use lasting materials that weather well and gracefully age. New buildings shall possess an architectural character that respects the traditional design principles of historic buildings on Main Street. The architectural design of the building adheres to principles of historic buildings at the first and second story with its uses of brick, its storefront design and vertical windows at the second story. At the upper stories, a prominent vertical design element that houses the elevator shaft and a wood canopy are integrated into the design of the overall building and serve as a prominent architectural feature at the front of the building. Both historic and contemporary architectural elements are incorporated to create continuity of design along Main Street while also providing variety and interest by the use of precast concrete and brick at the street level as the historic design elements, and metal shingles in contemporary signage as the contemporary elements. Okay, the next one has to do with parking lots, and in the design guidelines say that parking lots serving Main Street buildings shall be located at the rear of buildings. Side parking lots shall be avoided along Main Street in order to maintain the continuity of the building frontages along the street. And the design guidelines also contain another section where standards can be varied if there is a unique situation. And staff feels that this site does have a unique situation in that it's not on a corner, so there's no side street access. There's also no alley, so there's no rear access. And so really, Main Street is the only alternative to access and provide the parking on the side of the building. And the applicant has also provided some of that parking, of course, tucked in under the building. Okay, in terms of consistency with the citywide master plan and the downtown neighborhood plan, the goals and policies appear to be applicable to this application. A dynamic Littleton, foster a vibrant and evolving community, generate more opportunities for residents to live, shop, and play where they work, and to work, shop, and play where they live, and encourage housing that responds to changing demands in the local housing market. By providing office and residential space, the proposed development expands the opportunity for residents to live, shop, and play where they work, and to work, shop, and play where they live. Additionally, the proposed development will provide new housing within the downtown neighborhood where there is a current demand. Goal 4 of the citywide plan is about maintaining and expanding upon characteristics that make Littleton an authentic and distinctive community. And by aspiring for compatibility with the neighborhood's historic buildings, the proposed project aims to continue the character of the historic district. We get now into the downtown neighborhood plan. And this includes policies that relate directly to the proposed development. Policy LU 9A includes criteria regarding the height of buildings. Specifically, the Columbine Mill and the courthouse will be the dominant structures in downtown. The maximum height on Main Street should increase with additional distance from Main Street and preservation of the view of the mountains. So with this development, the step back on the upper stories, the proposed development generally meets this policy, and at 61 feet, the proposed building will be shorter than both the mill and the courthouse. Policy CN5 deals with parking in the downtown. While not allowing parking to diminish its overall design quality, downtown should have parking. Staff feels that with the proposed mixed-use building, the commercial and office uses is half the requirement per the city zoning code, and it does not appear that the proposal meets this intent of the policy. And so, in terms of the citywide master plan and the downtown neighborhood plan, the proposed project addresses many goals and policies, yet some do not appear to be addressed. The staff recommendation is that the proposed mixed-use development does not meet the criteria for reduction in parking per the planned development overlay criteria. In order to receive a recommendation of approval, a proposed development must meet all applicable criteria for a planned development overlay, and staff recommends denial of the proposed development. There are two resolutions in your packet. 15A is to deny the planned development overlay, and resolution 15B is to approve the planned development overlay for the mixed use at 2679 Main Street. If you have questions, I'm available.
Thank you. Okay, anybody have questions for Andrea? I'll start with Brian.
So I do. The staff communication suggests that joining the historic, the historic district, that would give a reduction in parking.
Yes.
Why is that? And can you explain the mechanics of that a little bit, please?
Sure. So when the historic district was put in place, and that was in 2004, it was thought that there would need to be incentives for property owners to join. It was not an inclusive district, it is an opt-in district, as you know. And so there were several incentives, and parking was perhaps the biggest one. And the incentive is that for any existing building, the use can change without requiring additional parking. For example, if you had a retail store and a property owner wanted to come in and convert it to a restaurant, restaurant has a much higher parking requirement associated with it. So under this incentive, the restaurant could in fact be placed in that building. The incentive also states that for any new square footage in the historic district, that it be parked at 50% of what the requirement is. At the time, it was felt that there was not necessarily so much of a need for parking as there was for good development that wasn't dominated by parking lots. The applicant has an opportunity to join the historic district, and if the project were in the historic district, there would be a few more criteria involved, and it would be a project that would also be reviewed by the Historical Preservation Board as well as the Planning Board.
Do you know what those criteria are? Can you just mention a few of them?
So the criteria have to do with compatibility. It gets more in detail about the compatibility with the new development, with the existing development within the historic district. So you're looking closely at things like, very closely at brick and other materials and heights and the width of storefront bays and how entrances are created.
Chair Elrod and Board and Andrea, I just also want to add the other thing is that the distinction between the historic district and just a straight request. If you join the district, then the building forever is within that district, and there's very strict guidelines about what can happen. So in essence, we're preserving the historicness and nature of the downtown, so we're getting something in return. So the incentive behind the parking in the historic district, if you join the district, what the community gets in return is that guarantee that it remains in the district and subject to those very strict design guidelines. So that's the difference, is that there's a community benefit by joining the district and you get that incentive.
Any other questions? I'll come back to the side. David, any other
I
questions?
kind of interrupted.
Brian, do you have more?
No.
Okay, let's go. Kurt then.
Andrea, I have one question on, are you aware whether the buildings that are directly across the Main Street to the south, do they meet the open space requirements as well as the parking requirements as they're configured now?
Directly across the street, are you referring to
No.
the View House?
As those buildings are configured now, do they meet the parking and open space requirements?
Many of the buildings on Main Street do not meet either the open space requirement or the parking requirement. There are a couple of complications to that as well. Much of Main Street is in the CA zone district that has a 10% open space requirement, whereas a few of these properties on the west end are in B2, the open space jumps up to 20%. And as we know, there are a few properties on Main Street that do have much in the way of parking.
Kurt, the other thing I would offer too is the building directly across the street, what potentially will be the View House in the future is in the historic district.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to know whether it met those criteria now, if you're aware of that. That's all I had right now.
Arcee? Okay, I'll come to my right. David?
Oh, yeah, I just was hoping you could explain a little bit more detail on the current design guidelines for the building step back height allowance. I wasn't really clear on that.
For the setback?
Yeah, is there a specific setback? Does the allowance allow you to do different things based on different criteria? And how's that, and I didn't quite get how that, I mean, I first didn't understand how, in detail how that works today and then how that differs from what they're offering, although it doesn't seem like they have much of a setback at all.
Okay, so there are two setbacks in question. One is the setback at the street level,
Right.
and that's a zoning code requirement. We'll start with that. In the B2 zone district, there are no setback requirements. But oftentimes with B2, most of the time with a B2 development, you do see a setback because we have an open space requirement that requires the open space to be located along the right-of-way line.
Right.
And so then the other setback is in the design guidelines, and that's after the second story, that the building be set back, dealing with, the scale and the bulk of the building. And in this instance, the proposal does include a setback, but it does encroach 25% into that setback area.
So there's a specific setback from on the second floor or above? I
Well-
just wasn't clear on that one.
Yeah, I don't believe it's a specific setback in terms of feet. It's feet setback. It's more about what's visible from the sidewalk across the street.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right.
Andrew?
I have a math question. On your chart about parking spaces, you had listed that it was 1 per 200 per the current PDO or current plan.
Yeah.
1 per 400 per the proposed, and then it said 64. Those were not apples to apples numbers to me. What is the total number of parking spaces and something opposite of 64 or similar to 64 is what I'm looking for, that it currently allowed under the existing zoning and the proposed zoning? And I have a follow-up after that.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I follow the question.
So if you go back to your chart, it's 87 slides back. Go back. No, one more up. There, right there. Okay. So
Okay.
in the middle, and there was one that this was more bold. Maybe the next one up. There. Okay. So in the first column, it says retail 1 per 200, office 1 per 300. In the second column, it says 1 per 400, 1 per 600. But in the third column, it says 64. 64 is a number to me.
Yes,
Those are ratios.
yes,
What does that mean in terms of a number?
I see. So the 1 per 200 means based on gross square footage. And so the applicant has divided up the building into the different uses. So for the gross square footage that will be used for retail space, The parking has been calculated based on 1 per 400, and that then translates into an actual number of spaces. And then the same for office. The applicant calculates the gross square footage for office at 1 per 600 under what's being proposed, and that comes up to a specific number of spaces, and the total of that plus the multifamily comes to 64.
So what Andrew, so what Andrew is asking, and I have the
sorry.
same question, is under the first column, which is under B2, what would that equate to as a number? And it's something more than 32, but I don't know
Oh,
what
I
it
see
is.
what you mean. I see, I'm sorry.
Another way
It's
we
been a
can,
while since I've done that math, so it would be more than the 32. There are five multifamily units, and so at 1.5 per unit, we're talking 8 spaces. So we subtract 8 from 64, we get 56. We divide 56 in 2, we get 28? No.
We
28.
can come
I
back
think
to
it's,
this.
I think it's
Maybe the
around
developer.
100 I think it's around 130 was. All right.
so we can ask that question to the developer, perhaps.
Okay.
Okay.
So that'd be 1. 2, what is it currently in downtown Littleton?
What is the, I'm sorry, what is the what?
Parking ratio. If you were to take all the businesses in downtown Littleton, if I was to be on Main Street, what is that ratio now?
As it exists, not as what required.
Correct. As reality is today.
You know, we haven't done that calculation.
What's the ratio for CA, given that CA is a predominant?
Yeah, so parking is actually based on the use as opposed to the code. So it would be the same numbers.
But we don't know what the historical precedent or today's number is. Given all the businesses that are in Littleton and everything, we don't have a general ballpark what that is?
We did do a few parking studies. We don't know that we've done a ratio for that.
Is 116 consistent with what downtown Littleton presently is?
Is 116, is it consistent with other buildings and how they are parked?
There's the Spice Shop, there's 17 restaurants, there's a bar.
Yeah.
Is that generally what we're talking about? Is this a fundamental change from the design of the neighborhood?
If the applicant were to provide the number of spaces required by the code, that would be a departure from the way the most of downtown is parked.
Departure meaning more spaces with
More spaces, yes. Many of the buildings downtown on Main Street have little, or in some cases, no parking, and they do not meet the required numbers.
Thank you.
Someone had a follow-up question to Andrew? Was it you, Brian? No, you're good.
Okay. Several months ago, the planning board looked at parking space dimensions, lowered the, not the width, but the length of the stalls. I think it failed at council. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That is correct. So we currently have the same dimensions we always had. It failed
Yes.
at council. Okay. In your legislation text, you mentioned the applicant, quote, applicant has chosen not to join the historic district. In the applicant's letter of intent, he quotes on page, I quote on page 2, the project will opt into the Main Street Historic District. I guess the question I have on my mind, and probably everybody's mind, is why? What's the difference? What's the conflict? Who's correct? Are they looking to do a fait accompli if they get approval from the planning board and then approach the
Well, yes.
Historic Preservation Board?
So here's how that works. If the applicant were to join the historic district today, tomorrow, then there is an existing building on that property. And under the existing historic preservation code, no buildings can be demolished.
Period?
That's right.
We're talking about basically hovels here on the site.
Well, there is a provision in the Historic Preservation Code where you could potentially demolish a building. The criteria is really quite strict, and it has to do with usability of the building, and it could potentially be very difficult to meet. The applicant has probably looked at that criteria and made his own analysis about that.
Read it word for word, but
So.
again, these are hovels we're talking about. Go
So
ahead.
if the applicant were to opt into the historic district, then the building could not be demolished. Conversely, the building could potentially be demolished now, and then the applicant joins the historic district.
I'll ask him the same question, so, okay, interesting. Elevator, stairway shafts, canopies, am I clear that they don't currently meet the setback requirements in the historic,
They do.
district guidelines?
Per the guidelines, they do encroach 25% into that visual area, and staff felt that that was justified, and by the fact that they are of high-quality materials and add to the design of the building.
So they encroach currently 25, or proposed 25%. The code reads none, I assume, no encroachments?
Yes, right.
Okay. In your summary, staff feels that less parking will have a detrimental effect on in the downtown parking.
Yes.
Yet, if they get if they join well, although they can't tear down their building, so if they did join the district ahead of time, it would be approved. What do? Grit your teeth and approve it, even though you're against it? If they join the district, they get their 50%. So you just live with it, I assume, right, as staff? Yeah.
You know what? We have some regulations for historic district, and we've got zoning regulations, and we work with what we have.
Okay. One last question. Are there any older buildings, not necessarily historic in quality, that have been torn down since the district was formed?
Yes, there have.
Which ones?
Yes, so there was a building, an older building, that was in the location of where the tavern is now located.
Yes, okay, Jet Bar, whatever that was, okay.
The rules were different at that time. At that time, each property that opted into the historic district, it was done by ordinance. These days, it's just done by simple application. And through that ordinance process, a provision was added into the ordinance that the developer had, I believe it was 2 years in which to demolish the building to put up something new. And that, I believe, is the only building that's been demolished since the district was put in place.
Thank you.
I have some questions. Any other questions from the board? Okay. Can you give me a sense of, I'm looking at the mass of the building, and you did share with us that 24% was for residential use, and I believe that's just for the units, not including parking, although the parking you also mentioned was only 8 spaces, so maybe it's something higher than 24% for residential. But if you could give me a sense of what percentage of the whole building is parking in total versus residential, commercial, retail, and office. Do you have that?
So you're asking what percentage is parking. So in other words, we would count all that street level parking shown on the site plan and compare that to the gross square footage of the building?
I guess I would look at just the building masses, what I'm trying to get a sense of what percent of that is parking versus space that is used for retail, commercial, or residential, the actual structure. Do you have that? You might not.
I don't have that. Perhaps the applicant does.
Okay. And you did state that the height of this building at its highest point, which is the elevator shaft, is at 61 feet, and it is lower than the mill and the courthouse. What is the height of the mill and the courthouse at its highest point?
Let's see, what are, can you, 8, for which one? 82 feet for the mill? $84 for the courthouse, yeah.
Okay. Do you also have a sense of, the areas of, the intent of this? Let me just start there. The intent of that is to ensure that the prominence of our skyline is the mill and the courthouse. So apart from the height, there's a consideration of mass. The courthouse has a little cupola that reaches that 82 feet, and the mill has a shaft, I guess, that reaches whatever that height is. Do you have a sense of how, so most of this building is at 53 feet?
53 and a half, right?
And maybe do you have a sense of the width of this elevator shaft that raises, goes above that 61? And is it just the elevator shaft or also the stairwell that goes to 61? Is it?
So you can see in this elevation here, the stair shaft is the taller one at the rear of the building.
Okay.
That's at 61 feet.
Okay.
The other one that's closer is the one that's at 54 and a half feet.
Okay. Do you have a sense of then
The width of it?
Yeah.
Well, I guess it depends on how you measure it. From the front, it's narrower than from the side. The applicant may have some specific dimensions on that.
Okay. One final thing, if you took a look at or considered, given the significance of the parking requirement as proposed, even though it's at a reduction of what the zoning allows, it's still significantly more traffic than, or traffic going into that area than happens now, just given the nature of the business that's there now, or was there versus what will be there. And that is one of the elements of the design guideline is that it remains pedestrian friendly.
Yes.
But yet we're creating a potential situation where there's a lot more cars that need to go in and out of a parking lot because it does not have that alley. Can you speak to, the consideration of how that, at least in your report, it states that it does still meet that pedestrian-friendly environment, yet there's a significant increase of traffic flow going in and out of that parking lot?
Yes, the way that the staff looked at it is that on Main Street, there's a fair amount of volume of traffic, but it's not necessarily at a high speed. So traffic as it approaches the building is coming in at a, lower or perhaps medium speed. And the amount of traffic that would be generated by this is not so significant that we anticipate cars to be queuing up. And so it would be much like other curb cuts that you see where there's an opportunity for eye contact between driver and pedestrian, and that would be the pedestrian friendliness of the overall sidewalk could reasonably be maintained.
Okay. Okay, any more questions for Andrea? Oh, Bruce, please.
Just a couple, Andrea. Can you go back to your B2 zone district requirements table? Yeah, either one of those will work. Just go over again. I understand the existing B2 zone requirements column, but I think I got confused between the proposed PDO zone requirements and the proposed PDO site plan. What's the difference between those two columns?
Yes, so the proposed B2 PDO zone requirements essentially shows what the overall zone requirement would be. So for example, if you take the top item, primary uses allowed. Existing B2 zone districts allows a number of uses, as I mentioned, office, restaurant, retail, libraries, and such. And the applicant is proposing no change to those uses. In the third column, that's where we've put what is actually proposed for the site. So, for example, down the road, if another use such as a restaurant wanted to locate there and there was enough parking, it would be permitted under this PDO.
Okay. Okay, I think I understand. All right, thanks for that. I guess, you're talking about the historic district, and I guess your point about the tavern was, I think, right. I think the key issue on that one was somehow the dirt had actually got designated as historic when they tore the structure down, which is what allowed Tavern to opt in. And I think Merle didn't opt in, even though he could have, because they had the Skelly station there, but he retained some of the architectural fabric of the gas station, but not enough to actually get it to come in and cut a deal anyway, I think, with the planning commission at the time, that the parking could be reduced. But if we're tearing down structures, I mean, to have a historically designated property, a lot of these things, I thought it had to be a minimum of 40 years old to start. But if you're knocking down historic, non-contributing, if you will, historic structures, which that has to do not with it has to do with the quality of the building and the structure, not with what it does for the economy. And putting up new, they can actually opt into an historic district without being on either an historic site or having historic fabric in the building to begin with? That doesn't seem quite right.
Yes, so one of the goals of the historic district is to get every property that has frontage on Main Street into the district. And in that way, all properties would be operating under the same rules, whether that building is new or historic, contributing or non-contributing.
Right.
And so that's why, for example, the tavern is in the historic district. It contributes to the overall character of Main Street.
But again, I thought that the tavern was odd because it was the only parcel there where the dirt actually had been designated as an historic site.
I think, well, I had heard that, the dirt, but that...
I don't remember why, yeah.
I think the way that it was looked at as the time was, again, what I said. There was an interest in getting all properties in the historic district.
All right.
And at the time, that building that was there was seen as non-contributing.
Right.
And so now the rules are different.
Okay. The last thing I wanted to ask you was, if you go to your packet, there are the schematics in what are these? I don't know. They're in the applicant's submission, and it's the standard kind of architectural schematics. But page 4 is a rendition of this structure relative to the Carnegie Library, which is now, of course, the melting pot. Is that to scale?
Yes, I believe it is.
So the setbacks and so much from looking across the street are fine, but years ago, when the library was conveyed in a property transaction, we talked about this in historic preservation, there's a view corridor easement that attached to the library property that had to be maintained. That issue came up because, recall, that the Reeds wanted to put the umbrellas and stuff out front or change some of the facade, and at that point, years ago, we had to consider what the view corridor easement said. I'm curious regarding an interpretation, which I don't think we can necessarily get tonight, as to what the mass and scale of this particular structure does to the view corridor easement on the Carnegie Library property, because it looks big relative to, and I don't know what the legal ramifications are there. I'll throw that out for somebody's consideration.
Yeah, so I recall that, the view easement for the Carnegie Library. As I recall it, it had directly to do with the visibility of the library itself. And so this building, while it is significantly larger, is off to the side.
Yeah, but if you look at your rendition here, it's not off by the side that much. I mean, if you're looking, right, I mean, right there, it certainly is within the field of view. I don't know, and this is what I'm saying, I'm not going to try to interpret it because I don't know what the legal parameters of a view corridor easement constitute.
Yes.
But it's something we ought to get some sort of a ruling on at some point because it may be pertinent to what's being considered, I guess.
Yes, as I recall, yes, it was, the view corridor was specifically associated with the Carnegie Library itself and not associated with zoning ordinance, design
agree.
guidelines, or other properties.
Okay.
But I,
Thank you.
it's been a while since I've looked at
It
that,
has been, yeah, no
since
doubt.
I've looked
I
at that particular
completely agree.
document.
To that, there was, I believe, I'm trying to find it now, but the comment, I'm pretty sure it's in the downtown plan, where it states that building heights should be such to preserve view of the mountains from Main Street east of Curtis, I believe is how it's written. And again, I think this depiction here shows that it is of, the height is significant such that while I'm standing in the middle of the, if I'm standing in the middle of the street, I have the clear view above Carnegie Library, but at a pedestrian level, may suggest that actually there is an infringement on that view. So to me, it, how that was a standard that was interpreted, perhaps wrongly interpreted.
I did bring with me an existing street view, which I got from Google Street View. And so you can see here what the existing mountain view is. Of course, in the summertime, it is obscured to some degree by the leaves on the trees. But we also take into consideration the B2 zone district and the height that is permitted and the setbacks that are permitted in that zone district.
And I understand that, but this isn't, it's not being proposed under B2, it's being
Yes,
proposed as an
it's a
exception.
PDO,
to-
yes.
Yep, Okay. Okay. One more administrative question, Andrea. It's on the actual application, the PDO application. And on here, where it shows the data and information sheet proposed zoning comparison chart. And it compares the existing zoning to the proposed PDO. So does the proposed PDO, if approved, would it, according to this, modify unobstructed space from 20% to 12%? It would modify the parking ratios, and it would also modify and define that maximum building height will now be 61. So again, going to the future state, if there's another building there or another use, would they have to be at that 61? So does it, in essence, truly change all of those elements? That's what would be approved. Which means we would
yes,
set a maximum height, is
You
really
know,
what that
with
says.
the exception of the maximum height here, I think there's a little bit of limitation with the actual application form.
There's what?
There's a limitation, I think, with this actual application form, and I think that the 61 feet that's put in the proposed PDO column is actually what the applicant is proposing for the site. If we go back to the zoning chart, the applicant is requesting to stick with the current B2 requirement, which is no maximum height. So if the PDO were to be approved and this building were built at 61 feet, in the future, potentially the building could go higher but it would have to meet, of course, it would need to meet parking requirements, the design guidelines, and all the criteria, again, that it met this first time around.
Okay, so for the board, the reason I pointed that out, I just wanted to make sure that everyone is aware that what will be applied is the second column here in Andrea's representation. So it would remain with an unlimited maximum height, and it would remain with a maximum floor area of 2:1, even if this particular development is coming in with specifics.
Yes.
That's that correctly? Okay. Okay.
One more question.
Yes, please.
One more question. Is the building owner required to make the parking that's there available publicly on nights, weekends, things like that?
The city has no requirement for that.
So it
is
could be a
parking.
private parking lot?
It could be a private parking lot. The applicant may want to speak to that.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And I think we have a presentation from the applicant.
I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page. Good evening.
Hi.
My name is Josh Rowland. I'm with LAI Design Group, and we're located at 88 Inverness Circle East in Inglewood. Thank you for the opportunity to present our project to you tonight. I'd like to express some sincere thanks to Andrea. She's worked very patiently and hard with us over the last 8 months now. She did a great job presenting the what about the proposal tonight, and I wanted to spend a little more time on the why, because as I think what was evident in some of the questions that came up after the presentation is there's a lot of information at play here in between the zoning ordinance and in between the design guidelines in the historic district. It's created some confusion in our efforts together. And so I just want to share with you how we got to where we are tonight. We don't make a practice of coming before a board without staff support. I think we have staff support on many, many issues, and the one that is in question here tonight, there's a story behind that, so we're here to tell that. I'm going to just open up our presentation. Let me get the, oh, there it goes. Great, thanks. Okay, gotcha. From the beginning. All right, thank you. As I mentioned, we're here tonight to present our project that we've titled Littleton Mixed Use. It's not our branding title. We'll get a little more creative as the project moves forward. But let me just briefly go over what it is I want to talk to you about tonight. Really, the essence, the reasons for this PDO request. There are inconsistencies between the B2 zone district and the design guidelines, and then subsequently some of the historic guidelines. It's left staff in a position where they have to make interpretations and where they have to make decisions that don't have a 100% clear path all the time. We've heard from staff on multiple occasions that this code it's very old, somewhat outdated. It's hard to apply to some of the newer mixed-use trends that we see, especially in these great little downtown areas where developers want to be. Those three criteria we're working from between the B2 zone district, the Main Street Historic District requirements, and the downtown design guidelines have conflicting requirements. And so a lot of times we're trying to meet the intent of all three. And I think ultimately what has resulted here is, staff was not comfortable making administrative interpretations, and they felt best to bring it to the planning board. So we're excited to be here tonight. We think we have a great project. It represents a $9 million investment in Littleton. It's at a gateway location that's really going to establish some excitement in the development market. letting the development community know that Littleton is open for business in this downtown district. And as I mentioned, we've been behind the scenes with staff for 6-7 months now, hammering out a lot of details. You can see the effort here. We've made a lot of changes. We've met a lot of staff's requests and requirements on this project, and we feel like we're bringing forward a presentation tonight that's going to be a great benefit to the city. Quick overview of the existing conditions. Our site's a little under an acre. It's 0.7 acres. We are proposing to demolish all 3 buildings on the site. As you've seen in the pictures so far tonight, there is not any historical relevance or, essence here that's worth keeping. I think everybody would like to see something new and vibrant in the city. What we have is a cinder block building with a metal parapet and a flat roof. The photograph in the bottom has a metal barn with a kind of an add-on cinder block front, and then out of view to the left of that photo is basically a trailer on blocks. So we're looking to demolish those buildings and move forward with a new project. The biggest conflict with this project is its zoning. The B2 district is not intended for a 30,000 square foot site on Main Street. It's intended for, and as it states in the code, 100,000 to 300,000 gross square feet of retail space. So we're talking a Walmart supercenter and pad sites and that kind of thing. And that's why the open space requirements are what they are, because it's exactly what you'd expect to see. Landscape buffer along major arterial frontages and in median islands, and furthermore, why the 50% requirement is asked to be situated out on the edge of the property to buffer those big parking fields and some of that visual there. We are in the downtown neighborhood plan area 5. And conversely to the B2, it requires that buildings be jammed right up on the property line, and for good reason. That's the character of downtown. It's the storefronts on Main Street. And so it was this criteria specifically that pushed this project into a PDO. I'll get into later kind of how we got to that, because we're trying to make some efforts internally to handle this otherwise. And again, as Andrea had mentioned, many of the properties, especially in Main Street, have alley access or have access from side streets that would allow you to maximize that frontage. What we've done is try to maximize the frontage as best as we can while still providing access. We have actually reduced the curb cuts from 2 to 1, and we've increased on-street parking with this proposal, so those are some benefits. And lastly, we're located in the boundaries of the historic district, the Main Street Historic District. It has opt-in status, which means we can join without meeting any additional prerequisites. However, we do have to go through the design review process, which means, as Andrea mentioned, it's more of a design-related component. We're looking at, historical significance with brick patterns and storefront dimensions and things like that. And just to specifically hit on this historic district, because the question was asked and it hits on the nose of kind of what our issue is. There's just kind of some funky sequencing with how the historic district works. It requires, in our instance, in our case, we'd have to demolish all the buildings before we could join. And technically, staff has decided that they can't review an application without that process being completed, even if, we were to put something in writing or state our inclination to do so. Just to clarify, our application from the beginning would be to apply as a new building and state that the existing buildings don't have historical significance and therefore don't fall under some of the allowances that Andrea mentioned, one being that demolition clause. I mean, it's clear to me, if you read it, that it's there to protect historic buildings so that somebody couldn't decide, I want to do something bigger and more, so I'm going to tear down a historic building. It requires that a building be basically unsafe and falling apart, and then you could have a provision to tear that down. So, again, that's one of those interpretation things where we feel like the district allows either a new building or a historic building to apply. That clause to us would be interpreted as not meeting the criteria. As mentioned, the district allows a 50% parking reduction. That's back to the nature of these lots on Main Street. They're small and irregular in order to maintain the character. It's very difficult to provide the parking flexibility you would have on a commercial site out in a greenfield project. So I think the city saw that as a potential problem with these uses and said, we don't want to discourage business on Main Street. We want to allow some provisions that will allow these businesses to be creative and move forward. And lastly, I have it up there just as an exhibit. We have a current proposal for a demolition on the site. We have current applications for demoing of Excel services. It's our intent to move quickly on this project. We've spent a lot of time on the planning boards and getting to this point with staff, and we're excited to move forward with this project. Just quickly, I'm not going to get into all the minutia, but please, I know there are still some questions out there about specifics, so if you have questions about dimensions and brick colors, I'm here to answer those. I just want to hit some of these issues at the high level first. Our PDO covers the open space reduction. It covers the location of the open space, covers the parking reduction. It covers parking stall dimensions, and I'm only going to hit on this briefly. During our design period, staff had told us about the proposal before planning board and then going to city council about the parking stall dimensions. And so we made changes on our project to reflect that, hoping that we would keep in track with what was happening at planning board and city council. And it wasn't until after that got denied at the council level that, we decided with staff support to keep those dimensions the same. It allowed for more open space. It allowed for what we believe are perfectly well-designed and efficient parking stalls. And so I think we have staff support that that's a reasonable request. And then it's the compatibility with standards and guidelines. And as Chairperson Elrod mentioned, there's a lot of criteria in those design guidelines, and some of those are specific criteria and some are more guideline related. I'm happy to answer questions about our building mass and setback as it relates to view corridors along Main Street. And just pointing out again, we've worked very hard with staff. We've made a lot of, I don't want to call them concessions, but we've made changes. We've enhanced building materials and finishes. We've gone through multiple design iterations to get this building to a place that staff is comfortable with. And you can go down this list and see that they support every aspect except the parking. And I'm going to speak to that here in just a second. Again, it's all due to this glitch with the timing. You have to respect a developer standpoint. They want to get some feedback from staff and from the board that's going to approve the project before they go and diminish an asset out there. They have a building there that they could lease, they could do something with. So it's not smart business to go and tear a building down before you have any indication about how the board that's going to decide on it feels about the project. The open space request, I think everybody has a fairly good sense of that. The criterias in the B2 and the downtown guidelines create the conflict. We've used that 12% open space in I think all the right places. We have landscape buffers around the west and north and east edges to do a little bit of buffering. And then along our building frontage at Main Street, we've got about a 14-foot wide pedestrian plaza there that'll serve as a nice space for pedestrians to move in. That's also where we have our loading zone, which isn't in the open space, but it's going to feel like a pedestrian plaza there because it's only going to be used intermittently. We've also screened the parking to the greatest extent that we can. There is a decorative brick wall on the west side of our driveway that screens any of the parking there, so we've made many accommodations to carry the consistency of that architectural theme across the frontage. And something that wasn't mentioned in staff's presentation is there's precedent for these requests. The most recent project on Main Street, understanding there aren't very many, is the tavern in that project. They're in that CA district, which has a 10% requirement. Their PDO requested 2% open space, so that's about an 80% reduction, and we're looking at roughly a 40% reduction. So jumping into the parking reduction, during the first stages of our review process, our goal was to do an SDP review, internal with staff, to get to a comfort level with staff's position, and then to back out and go and demolish the buildings, join the historic district, and then have a project that could be approved administratively. It was the open space requirement that staff felt triggered the PDO and what ultimately brought us, to this next kind of Plan B of our application process. One of the things that staff asked at the time when we were still considering the SDP was, don't request a 50% reduction on the residential, and we complied with that. We have no reduction in the residential uses. We do technically have a 50% reduction for the office and retail at this time. However, that requirement is 61 spaces, and we're at 64, so we're a little bit above that 50%. The policy, the city's policy for the downtown district encourages this type of thing. It encourages joining historic districts for the parking reduction, and primarily, I think, and it's written in staff's report, second to the last page, it states that it reminds us that downtown Littleton is it's a transit-oriented development. I mean, we have 6 bus routes, we have light rail, all accessing this site. And I think the thing that's very different about this site compared to the Tavern or Merle's is that we have folks occupying this building that are much more likely to use transit. We have commuters who can get in the habit of riding the light rail, riding the bus. We live in an expensive city, I think we would all agree. And young families starting out looking for ways to have one vehicle or to save money on insurance and gas. I myself worked in the white clapboard house on Alamo, just a block over, back when I moved here in '98, and I rode the light rail every day from Inglewood to my office there. And so, I'm a testament to that, I guess. And secondly, as I apologize, I don't remember which board member mentioned it, but we have the ability to kind of have a separate revenue stream. We have parking that's actually available during the peak hours, during evenings and weekends when the people who work in these offices who occupy most of the spaces are not there. And the applicant has discussed with staff and with us, that's another way to generate some revenue. So while I can't present to you a specific proposal for that tonight, it has certainly been discussed. So while you've got restaurants who have requested parking reductions, exacerbating the problem during peak hours, we actually have a project that could provide some relief to that during peak hours. And to that extent, the Tavern project, overall, if you look at the Tavern plus all the buildings on that block, which were looked at as a single PDO, they have a 75% parking reduction overall on that project, and it speaks to what you guys pointed out, that downtown it can't park a big field like a Walmart. It has some challenges. The Merle's restaurant itself, when you look at their PDO criteria, they had a 95% parking reduction, and the Tavern had a 95%. The Merle's had a 100% parking reduction. There's no parking with that. So restaurants with the highest use during peak hours with no parking. What we're trying to do is take advantage of some of that reduction, provide a quality project, and hopefully provide some relief as well in the future. And just entertain me for 1 minute on this, because I thought staff has mentioned to us that some of the code is very old and a bit antiquated and hard to apply in some respects. We looked at Inglewood and Greenwood Village just to see how they handle this. And the only difference is that they look at more of a net leasable square footage when they apply parking versus gross. They do exclude stairways and elevators and lobbies and things like that, to just look at really where the person who parks the car is sitting for that amount of time. While their parking ratios are identical, if not very similar to Littleton's on the 1 per 300, that would actually reduce our parking demand, if we were to look at it that way, by about 20 stalls, which would represent more along the lines of a 30% reduction. Secondly, the parking that's provided will dictate who our tenant's going to be. If a tenant has an employee that needs a parking stall, they won't be interested in this. It will dictate it to some extent who will lease space in this building. We're targeting kind of a higher end business client. They might have larger office space. They might not be utilizing 100% of the floor area. We have 5 high-end residential apartments on the top floor. So, there's a particular character, and you can see it in the design of the building. We have all high-end materials on the finish. We have high design details, and I think it's going to speak to who our tenants might possibly be. And again, the city policy actually encourages the parking reduction. It states in their goals that due to, incentive programs are mentioned in the staff report regarding reductions for historic designations, reductions for transit-related advantages. I mean, that's what we cited in our letter of intent, and that's our rationale for the parking reduction. And we have all along stated to staff that it's our intent to join the district, and it's purely because we're not comfortable without having come to you first and presented the project in its entirety to, weigh it based on all of its merits before we go and start changing the nature of what's out there today. Again, the possibility for some paid parking certainly exists. With that, I'm just going to make myself available for questions. I know there are questions. I won't try to guess exactly which ones you still have, but thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, questions? I'll start from the right this time.
Okay. So could you reiterate, you touched on the historic district. Have you spoken with the historic board? Or I know Andrea had mentioned that there are certain guidelines, specific guidelines for the design of the building. Do you meet those guidelines? Have you talked to them about that?
Yeah, I wasn't going to get...
Or are you entering in
Many of the
afterwards?
criteria in the downtown design guidelines, I think, kind of enter into some of the same concerns that the historic district has. Staff has shared with us what we can expect to see. It's more of kind of like a finishes and paint colors than it is big structural design components. Your downtown design guidelines mandate that historical character, which is why you see a very traditional first two floors. Just to clarify, our third and fourth floors comply with the setback requirements for the most part. Because of how the building's designed, we have to have vertical circulation there on the ground floor. The stairs got to go straight up, elevators got to go straight up. So that 25% reduction that Andrea mentioned is actually, it's saying that we can have a portion of that front elevation encroach into the setback requirements to accommodate for vertical circulation. And when you read the design guidelines, there is a caveat at the bottom of this specific section that says accommodations can be made for superior design finishes and materials. So, I mean, there are opportunities in those design guidelines to allow staff to interpret, and that's what they've done here.
Right, so maybe my question is, are you going to join the board prior to, or with the intent of making changes that they request to the finishes and?
That's an obligation that we put on ourselves when we join the district. Yep.
All right, and then is your parking, does it have or you plan to have designated spots for residents, designated spots for?
Residents will have designated spots under the building. Okay,
and during the day, will there be spots for the retail tenants, so one or two customers? I mean, because I think the requirement's only 8 spaces.
I thought about that just last night as I was kind of hashing through my notes that, those 12 spaces or so right there at the front of the driveway, just like you see at a dry cleaner or something, this space is dedicated for that use. So I think retailers will probably demand it. If somebody wants to be a retailer in there, it'll be a condition of the lease, quite possibly. Yeah. Those are some of the details that we're thinking about but aren't totally ironed out at this time.
Right, and one thing I can't remember hearing is this building totally spec, or do you have tenants that are interested, or have you spoken to any tenants?
We have a few. We have a lot of interest in the retail space, and if you read into the specific details, a third of the ground floor is office because it's a bank, and Bank of Colorado is committed to that space. Okay. And we have a lot of interested retailers in the other 2/3 of that.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
Why was the decision to stick with historic preservation standards on the first 2 floors different than the second 2 floors? You took I'd argue, a more modern style on the top part.
We're, as designers, we're trying to create a story, right? And so if the goal was to keep this historic presence on Main Street, you see it in other downtown areas where maybe somebody popped the top on an old historic building and did a little modern add-on. And that's kind of the That was our design intent behind that decision. You know, it's pushed back enough. We're trying to just be a little more creative and a little more, think out of the box a little bit with that.
Would you be open to sticking with the historic preservation standards for the upper two floors if that became a design constraint?
I would have to defer to the owner on that. They're pretty excited about this concept at the moment.
Are you holding yourself to any sort of standard, a LEED standard, or any sort of design standard?
We're not to that level yet, but I can tell you that you can achieve silver without shaking a stick. I mean, these days, all of the building code requirements for HVAC and glazing and that type of thing get you into that category without really even having to try too hard. But
okay. I think construction defects answers my question, but would these places be for rent or for sale?
for rent. But they're,
Even the
1,800,
residences?
2,300 square feet. I mean, some of the detail, because we got pretty far along in the SDP process before we kind of stripped it down for the PDO. We have detailed floor plans for these units, and they're designed to be a high-end unit. They all have views to the west and the south, so they'll be pretty desirable units.
And we'd have office on 2, 3, and 4?
2 and 3.
2 and 3, and what is the?
1, 2, and 3 is a bank space on 1, which is office technically, and then 2 and 3 are office, and 4 is the residential.
And are they 1,500 square feet? Are they 3,000 square feet? They vary, of course.
The apartments?
The office spaces?
Right now, they're just shell. So we show the lobby space on outside the elevator and the stair corridors, and we show a restroom core, which is what I used to kind of, when I was doing the comparison about a net versus gross floor area, we took out the core stuff to show you what the net leasable would be and how that would take 20 spaces out of the mix.
Are you saying by 20 spaces, that would imply there are 20 people working in the office space?
No, I apologize. Right now, we have on the first floor, we have 3,700 square feet, about a third of which is office. On the second floor, we have 14,000 square feet of office. And on the third floor, we have 13,000 plus or minus square feet of office.
3,700 because you have all the parking behind it.
Right.
14,000.
So it's roughly about 13 to 14 a floor on the second and third. And then it's less on the fourth because we have a lot of balcony space outdoors for the residents.
So if somebody wanted to take that and put a call center in there, they very well could.
I don't know if call center is in the same category as office. Normally it is. Okay, they could.
We could put 50 people on that second floor if we wanted to.
Right, but I would argue that the site characteristics and the rent that the owner will be charging in such a Class A location would dictate the tenant.
Can the first floor be a restaurant?
No.
It cannot.
Not unless something, no, it couldn't. We've shown that it's parked at a retail rate. We know that it can't support it, so this PDO shows retail.
Okay. Do you have a view of, we mentioned the skyline and the heights. Do you have a view of Littleton relative to the skyline of your design?
So from one of the balcony levels?
So
or?
looking from the west, as if I'm driving up Bowles into Littleton, I see the courthouse, I see the old mill, and I see your building.
We have a very detailed model constructed of the whole approach along Main Street. I can show you that this image on the bottom reflects that.
No, it's the complete opposite of that.
Oh.
The bottom.
As if I'm standing at the river looking at Littleton.
Well, the closest thing is in the middle there. It's looking from basically the parking lot outside the Masonic building. You wouldn't see it because it's obstructed a lot by trees and by the library, by the melting pot. So, I mean, the building will be visible from Santa Fe, if that's kind of the question you're getting at.
It will become part of Littleton skyline.
Absolutely.
And I'd like to see it as part of it.
And that's why, we've paid special attention to that elevation in particular we have metal balconies hanging off the second floor we changed the materials up. I mean, I think what we've designed is more dynamic than treating it all historic, because we did have that during some iterations. We were going back and forth with staff. The big thing revolved around how we treat that vertical circulation corridor in the front. It ended up with a lot of glazing looking east along Main Street, so that side of the building is decorated, if you will, and has a very attractive look. And conversely, that west elevation we felt like needed to have changes of materials. It needed to be stepped back as well, which we've done, even though that's not a requirement. So I feel like we've been successful at making that be an attractive building. It does, however, have to have that roof access egress stair corridor, and that's what gets to that 61-foot. But you got to have HVAC and other equipment on the roof, and that's how you get them up there.
Will that be stylized, or will it just be a giant cinder block or steel column?
It's brick. It's just a
It'll
color that
maintain the
matches.
same style.
Yeah, we're not going to like split face block or something to save money. This is another market window, if you will, for the project. So.
Great, thank you.
How much time and effort did you take approaching Historic Preservation Board to declare the buildings non-contributing, and thus being able to tear them down and be part of the Historic Preservation or Historic District?
Okay. I'll go to my last slide that I didn't quite get to, just to help answer that question. We started pre-application meetings as early as November of last year, and there was actually a whole nother iteration of a design effort before that. But from the very beginning, I had spoken with Dennis Swain, who is the long-range planner, who seems to have his finger on the pulse of the historic district and their goals, and he was certainly the first advocate for encouraging us to take a part of all the benefits that the Historic Preservation District offers. It wasn't shy to mention the parking reduction, as well as all the other benefits, the tax breaks, and then what the city gets back, which is first getting that property in the district so that they have some controls for the future, as well as having some say in the design. So during all of our pre-application meetings and submittal meetings, we made clear our intent, but that's the extent. It became apparent. So what happens, we had our pre-app in November. Staff didn't identify any potential roadblocks. They outlined a path at that time for a PDO because there were some open space issues at the time. We spent 2.5 months preparing all of our submittal materials, came in to submit, and they said, we just realized this demolition clause is going to cause you a problem. And that's when everything kind of went a little sideways, where we had already invested our time and efforts into making the submittal. So that's when we were basically cut off from the Historic Preservation District and said, you can't do anything until you go and join that. And that's when it became kind of a non-starter for us. We needed to hear from staff. We needed to hear from the planning board.
Okay, I got it.
Gotcha.
I want to go through the process, I think you said, or correct me. First, you're going to demolish the buildings. Then, I think you said you're going to apply to the historic district, to join the historic district. This is before you're building. Before you build, before you finalize your plans, you're going to join the Historic Preservation District, am I correct?
That's correct.
Then, will you then comply to historic preservation criteria that might require some changes to your design?
We anticipate some changes to the design. Now, the nature of those changes, as it's been explained to us by staff, is that it's finishes. Maybe the windows get a little bigger, or maybe the brick color changes, but it's not. They've said that if this thing gets structurally approved in essence, as it looks in this PDO, that it's not the practice of the Preservation District to. I don't think the Preservation District has a lot of experience with new buildings, so we're probably all in for a bit of a ride. But we've been told, and no guarantees have been made, but it's been explained to us that the general nature of the Historic Preservation District is to comment on brick patterns, grout colors, finishes, and things of that nature. You have your design guidelines for the downtown district that also have already dictated keeping a historical character to the extent that we're showing today.
But the important point is you're going to apply to the historic district before your drawings are completed and before you go for a permit?
I believe that staff will require it in order to approve the SDP. Because we have another step with staff after we hammer out these details. We have to get administrative review of the SDP finished. We're 75% there, 50% there. I don't know how you would weigh it, but there's a lot more work than what you're seeing today that's already done.
I guess what guarantee do we have that you're going to do that step in joining the Historic Preservation Board versus demolishing your buildings, go through staff review, avoid the Historic Preservation Board entirely because you're not opting into the district, and then just build?
We asked staff if we could get their support on this parking issue based on a requirement placed on this PDO that we join the Historic Preservation District. And that wasn't acceptable to them. They felt they were in a position that because we weren't technically, physically in the district, they couldn't put on the staff report that they supported that component of the project. We've made it clear since I've got our pre-app meeting notes from our very first pre-app. It says applicant expressed interest, intends to join. So we've been very transparent with staff throughout the whole process.
Thank you.
I'll start with Brian. Do you have anything?
Yes. So first of all, Andrew, to your question about, I did some math based on the square footages that he provided, and it looks like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but according to the current B2, it would be 115 parking spaces, and you're proposing 64.
You're right. Yeah.
So you're at 56% of what's currently required, not quite 50.
Convince you to consider those net versus gross and look at our on-street parking. We're really at 30%. I mean, we're not coming in here trying to bleed a stone. You know, we're trying to make a project work that we think is the right project and do what's right by the city too.
So my question is, did you ever consider the feasibility of digging down and building an underground parking, even if it's for pay, if you charge for it?
Funny that you ask. This was our original concept here, to solve the city's parking problems and to build a parking structure. And we had support. We didn't have support. We had some encouragement from the city manager at the time, who's no longer the city manager. And there's another interpretation in your code that counts structured parking towards the FAR. Kind of like double dipping. If I got an office and a parking lot and the people are either in the parking lot or in the office, I got to count twice. And it's also not consistent with other jurisdictions near you. Maybe another example of a parking, of an antiquated section of the code, possibly. But this applicant has spent a lot of money, and it's risk. They're a developer, it's risk, we get it. But this was, we started a year ago, actually 13 months ago with this process and had other ideas. But, I think everyone's happy with where we are, for sure. But to answer your question, the site it's challenging to do underground because it's small. You can't get down very fast. You got to go up 5% down into the hole. It's a
too
small
tight.
site. It's hard to do.
Okay, thank you.
Kurt, do you have anything?
You did say you have separate residential parking, but will that be secured parking, or is it just all open parking in that lower level?
We won't have gated parking specifically for the residents, but there'll be designated spots for them.
And then your traffic study, are you seeing any issues with ingress, egress there when cars are backing out of a parking space and someone's pulling in?
No, I mean, it's a pretty standard parking lot design. It's not a huge parking lot, so, it's going to have its peaks. It's going to have morning and afternoon, but because it's an office, you're not going to see a lot of that peak spread out over the whole day. So, the majority of the parking is in the rear in kind of well-organized bays, so I think we're in good shape. The traffic report identified about 50 plus or minus trips during the peak AM, PM. And when you look at the amount of traffic that's on Main Street, it's a very small fraction. And I think Andrea explained very well, and it can also be seen in our site design. We tried to really open up the cone of vision, especially looking back east on Main Street, so that cars exiting had a defined place to stop and look for pedestrians and then move out into the driveway apron before they stopped again, looked at oncoming traffic, and exited to the west.
Marcy?
My 3 questions have been asked, so I have no other questions.
Okay, thank you. You talked about having already a business that has committed, Colorado Business Bank, I believe you said. And one of the things that we've experienced downtown, and maybe some of you can confirm this or not, the initial intent, I will use Smoke and Fins, where the restaurant is now. The initial intent of that was a mixed use with, I believe, either retail or office on the bottom floor, that, you know, the market never supported it. And so then it had to change to restaurant for it to come to fruition. And of course, we've talked a lot about with a restaurant use that creates different type of scenario for parking and et cetera. So I guess my point is, while you are designing for a certain intent, the market at the end will dictate what ends up there. And I have a concern of, if these uses cannot come to fruition as intended, can you still, you know, will this building remain vacant, which is what we absolutely don't want in downtown, or will it turn into a restaurant, which is fantastic, but then fantastic in the sense creating vibrancy, but would create a much more significant parking issue than you're able to probably accommodate now?
To answer the first part of your question about Bank of Colorado, the only reason I can speak with pretty much absolute certainty on that is they are one of the 50% partners in the project and have and this is their building, and they're looking to do a small space there that's really maybe an office or two for loan officers, have an ATM. So maybe it's not the bank in the traditional sense where you'd have teller counters and a lot of people in and out. It's more of a kind of like a financial institution. So I can speak to that. The other is a valid question, but I don't know if I'm answering this correctly, and I'll defer to Andrea or Jocelyn, but I think with our PDO stating specifically how the parking is allocated, that if somebody were to come in for a restaurant, that they would look to this PDO and say, this project does not accommodate a restaurant. So that's how I'd answer the second part of your question.
Andrew, is that a correct statement? So to reiterate the question from my part, could a restaurant occupy this space in the future under the proposed PDO?
Yes, so the proposed PDO includes the uses on it and the parking associated with that. If we introduce a new use, one that has a higher parking ratio, then the parking requirement would need to be met for that use. So it would be perhaps not possible at all to have a restaurant at this location.
Okay. I think that's all I have for now. Thank you. Okay. Any more final questions? No. Okay. We'll now open it up to, thank you, we'll open it up to public comment. And Denise, do you have a list? Okay. So I have John Coast is not in favor of the project and is looking to speak tonight. John, did I say this correct? John Coast? Perhaps has left the building. Pam Chadbourne is opposed to the project and would like to speak.
Good evening, Planning Board. I live a block and a half from here, so I have a stake in this. Let me say this is Valley Feed. Gary Sutton's family has been here for a long time, and Valley Feed refers to the agricultural nature of the beginning of Littleton on the Platte River. So this is a historic site and historic use, and these buildings are historic in my mind. I grew up here, so that's many decades, folks. To say there's no intrinsic value is wrong. Also, it's funny how staff can read a paragraph and I look at the same words and see it differently, and let me refer to the overall sense of relationship to nearby buildings. So you know what's nearby is the Masonic Lodge and the Carnegie Library. That library was my library. I went down to the basement. Mrs. Brown was my librarian as a kid. That has huge significance to Littleton and value. There are very few Carnegie setups left. So the courthouse is on one end and the library is on the other, and these folks want to put a 4-story building next to the library. To me, that does not conform to Littleton, much less to the wording of our guidelines. So on that basis alone, I would not approve this. I appreciate that staff picked out that the parking is a problem, and let me point out that times change, Planning Board. So the fact that boards and commissions made concessions for previous developers in different times does not make you or even allow you to make the same decision now. You are constrained by these times, and we have parking problems in Littleton and no solution to them. So there is no right to rezoning. These folks may have worked hard, and that's nice, but there is no entitlement to rezoning. So you don't have to do this. And times have changed. So let me say Cinderella had a glass slipper, and there's a right size for what goes in that glass slipper. So the stepsister tried, and it didn't fit. So I'm not seeing this building you folks have already brought up, and I commend you for it. Scale and mass do not fit the historic nature of the surrounding buildings and the nearby buildings, and these are critical to Littleton. And safety, great point, because they're coming right up to the street. So I've walked in big cities, and the cars are coming out, and you're always looking at what's coming there, and there's no provision for that. The issue about the setbacks and the side access means that in the lot, it doesn't fill up the whole lot. There's room somewhere, yet these guys are filling up the whole lot. So I have a whole bunch of other points and not enough time. Planning Board, you're not forced to do this. Times have changed, and you should not recommend this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next I have Robin Schwartzbecken. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Some of us just have more fun last names than others. So Robin Schwartzbecker, District 3. First, I'd like to say it seems the plans for the building to replace the old Feed Valley store paid attention to detail. The structure is nice looking, and while it's 4 stories, the upper level being set back helps the scale to be less dominating, though it is a very dominating building. A couple of concerns. I agree with the staff analysis. The request to reduce the amount of parking is not acceptable. Parking on Main Street is already very challenging, and this would make the problem even worse. Besides, studies show people living around transit do not drive less. Main Street is a parking problem. Ignoring it will not make it go away. I don't agree with changing the stall size to make them smaller. Not too long ago, council voted to keep the stall sizes at 9 by 20. Littleton does not need to shrink the stall size just because asked. Personally, I appreciate not having tight parking like other communities. So I say thank you to council for not shrinking Littleton's stall size. My second concern has to do with character, or perhaps it's better to say Littleton's vanishing character. It's most certainly great to have a vacant building replaced. Having more shops on Main Street is good. I'm looking forward to what businesses move in. The thing is downtown Littleton, Main Street Littleton, is to have a small town effect. It has a quaintness. It has historic buildings. If we keep replacing the character and charm of Main Street, pretty soon we'll just be another Main Street and Anywhere USA. Recently, I visited a friend in Boulder, and we took a walk down the mall. It looks like Anywhere USA. My friend is very bummed. He said Boulder has a strong code, but they kept making exception after exception, and now, why bother? Where's the charm and the quaintness? It's gone. So yes, build, revitalize. Just please do not make our Littleton Main Street Anywhere USA as Boulder did on their mall. Buildings can be built with modern amenities and still maintain the character and charm that draws people to Littleton. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Jeremy Martin. Jeremy? Okay. Does anyone else from the public want to speak on this topic that has not signed up? Carol?
I'm Carol Brezak. I live in the 4th District. First thing I want to say, I think it's an attractive looking building. I don't know how many times you've had projects brought forward and they're not attractive. They look like everything up and down the light rail line. So I was pleased to see all the brick on this and the facade. It actually looked like it might fit. But the scale and mass of it's too much. And listening to the conversation tonight about HPB and their upper stories, just what little I know about how picky they can be, I doubt that the upper floors are going to survive the way they've been presented if they go through HPB. This is a picky little thing, but the trees are gone in front of the building. And I don't like that. I kind of like the trees in downtown Littleton. I want to go back to HPB and the historic dirt, and I can't remember the sequence, but now I am going to go back and listen or look at the minutes of that meeting, because I remember something about the tavern and the building and HPB, and if a building can't be demolished once they get into HPB, then they must have demolished it, and that's when Doug said on council that they were approving the dirt for historic preservation. But isn't there also a requirement that the building be at least 40 years old? So how do you get into HPB if your building's brand new? I guess the way around everything is to make the dirt historic. And frankly, I'm tired of reading rules and regulations and then finding ways to worm your way around things to make it work. Andrea said that the HPB parking incentive goes back to 2004. I agree with Pam. Times have changed. I think it might be time to get HPB and maybe planning board and some staff together and talk about that incentive. Can we really maintain that incentive in today's environment? And if we don't do that, we will continue to run up against these circumstances, which we ran up with Merle's, and planning board and the council just kind of turned a blind eye to the parking requirement, which just exacerbates the parking problem that we have in downtown Littleton. So there's some good things, but I would like to say that I support staff's decision on this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Don.
Good evening, Board. Don Bruns, District 4. I have 3 subjects for your consideration. First, the assertion that this proposal meets the requirement to maintain overall sense of relationship to adjoining buildings seems imaginative. For example, the referenced height of the mill and courthouse appear to be inappropriate comparisons to the proposal's considerable mass. The mill is not on Main Street, and the courthouse lacks the proposed building's mass at height, as was well illustrated by the color graphics we've been presented to us tonight. Secondly, the assertion that the proposal appears consistent with downtown character should be questioned because it does not appear that an objective inventory of existing community character adjoining relative proportions of green biomass volume, architectural mass, and paved over hardscapes has ever been completed. And thirdly, positive rationale for the requested open space and parking variances from the city code appear to be lacking. In other words, the proposal fails to explain why, in terms of desired end results or beneficial outcomes to be achieved by the citizens of Littleton by this project. I too appreciate the work they've done to make this look nice. Whoever did that had the hand in it. It's great. But I too think that the open space and the tree-lined corridor of the city is significant. And so denial of the requested open space and parking variances is suggested. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public? Okay. I will now, do I close the public hearing before I allow the applicant to respond, or do I allow the applicant to respond?
You'd want to go ahead and have the applicant come up and provide a rebuttal.
The applicant wants to, you can come up.
Josh Rowland with LAI. I only wanted to respond to one point, because for artistic license only did we remove the trees from the rendering. 2 trees are being preserved. Parks and Rec Forestry has asked that we remove one that's not healthy, and we'll be replacing it. So we will have trees, and 2 of the big ones are staying. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. All right, we will now close the public hearing. Do I have a motion on the table? Shall I make a motion?
I move to approve Planning Board Resolution Number 15B-2016, which approves the planned development overlay application for the proposed mixed-use development located at 2679 West Main Street.
I second.
So I want to clarify that. So what I heard was a motion to approve.
Correct.
Planning Board Resolution Number 15. Okay. Discussion. Comments from anyone?
I just believe that times have changed, that this is a high-quality development, something that's needed at the west end to provide an anchor of the west end of Main Street to create that pedestrian traffic and the dumbbells along Main Street to pull people to either end. I believe it's compatible with our comprehensive plan, and the downtown design standards and guidelines seem to be met. My biggest concern is parking, but I do believe that the additional parking spaces, which are currently non-existent in downtown, if they're made available in evenings and weekends when there is the biggest crunch, I believe that that's a benefit to the city.
Okay. Anybody else?
I have a question. Can we amend the motion to require approval of the historic board before we, well, I don't know how that works, not necessarily before we approve the PDO, but as a condition of the PDO?
To have the Historic Preservation Board review the...
Well, to have the applicant join the preservation board and go through the process of having that, their project approved by the Historic Preservation Board. Whatever design guideline, whatever design changes need to be made to get that approval.
To have the approval, yes, you could, so you'd make a motion to amend now.
Okay, so I make a motion to amend the,
Motion to amend the main motion.
yeah, okay, that's what I was going to say. Okay, so amend the main motion to require the applicant to join the preservation board, or to join the preservation district.
Historic preservation.
Or historic preservation district, yes, and get approval for, from the board for their design.
Second.
Okay.
I'm sorry, it's called the Historic District, not the Historic Preservation District, am I correct?
Called the Main Street Historic District.
The Main Street Historic District, then.
Okay.
Seconded. So do we take a vote then?
Vote on the
Not-
amendment?
Or do we
We're still
wait?
discussing here.
Still
I'm just-
leaving discussion on the table. Any further discussion?
Yeah, well, I feel like I'm standing on a bed of sand here. This project is pulling me in all different directions. Start out with, I agree with the open space reduction along Main Street. This building needs to be put on Main Street, period. So no problem with the reduction of the total open space and then the open space along Main Street. I agree that this project will be a catalyst to the west end of downtown. The western end was probably 110 years ago the industrial area of downtown. It is still kind of the backwoods of downtown Littleton. Further to the east, it's a lot more attractive, a lot more vibrant. As you go further to the west, it basically falls apart until you get to the melting pot. And I think part of the problem is the buildings that are set back and old industrial in nature. I agree that the design is of high quality. I also somewhat accept the architect's criteria or argument that the modern retrofit or addition looking and attached to more of an historic lower building is appropriate here. The parking I had trouble with, but if they join the district, they would get that 50% reduction. So I wish it had more parking, but it allows that 50% reduction. I do find it, though, amusing that the parking open space is always sacrificed and reduced because it wouldn't work on the site. Never is the alternative to reduce the square footage of the project to meet the existing zoning requirements. It's always the parking and the open space that's sacrificed. The applicant's discussion about light rail, I doubt if any of retail users to this project would ride light rail. Perhaps maybe some of the office workers would use light rail, so I do not think that the argument that light rail is a reason for lowering the parking is a good reason. At the end of your letter of intent, you say the changes are necessary to make this project financially viable. The planning board is not the arbiter of financial viability. The market is. If the project is not financially viable, then the land may be overpriced. You may be paying too much. You're looking to increase your profits, or the uses are not compatible with the community. None of these points are the responsibility of the planning board to mitigate. But I keep coming back to what I come back to often, and that is, this is a B2 zoning district. This lot has specific rights and uses by right. So I have to balance that with the parking, the bulk of the building, let's call it the fitting into the downtown area, and I haven't the slightest idea how I'm going to be voting.
Okay. Bruce, do you have any comments?
Sure. Essentially, by law, the PDO structure, in essence, is an exchange. It's a deal between the municipality and the developer. And in exchange for flexibility by the municipality for extra the zoning is modified, or the use for the zoning is modified in exchange for extra quality amenities or something else the community would not otherwise get. I think board member or commissioner, I don't know yet if
we're still
one
bored.
or the other yet, but Radnicki made an interesting point about it, the West End being industrialized, and I agree with that. I think this, or maybe it was Kurt or Brian that said it as well. Long story short, the applicant has to according to section 10-9-5, the proposed development has to demonstrate special attention to creative, high-quality design and producing development that reinforces and complements citywide and neighborhood design goals and objectives. And they've spent a fair amount, staff and the applicant, talking about the attributes of the comp plan and the design guidelines and the downtown neighborhood plan that they do comply with or meet. And yet there are some that they have conveniently, I think, sort of matadored for this particular project, mainly having to do with mass and scale. So citywide plan goal 4-2 talks about encouraging preservation of historic districts, and we've sort of talked about that. But citywide plan goal 4-4 talks about encouraging architecture of place and small independent businesses that differentiate Littleton. Likewise, the downtown neighborhood plan land use goal 3B talks about ensuring development that will conform to existing scale, mass, and feel. And I think we've talked a bit about Merle's and the Tavern being projects that do fit well, but those are both two-story projects. Land use item number 9 on the downtown neighborhood plan talks about building height respecting historic scale and character, and land use goal 10 talks about development adjacent to iconic structures should respect and not detract from their prominence. And we've also talked a bit about the library and so forth. I think it's a good project. A number of people have commented that it is in fact a quality design, and I would hope that they would do LEED, gold or so forth and so on. I would be much, much more comfortable with this project if it resided, for example, in the Broadway corridor or the Santa Fe corridor. It's really, it does meet some of the objectives of the citywide plan and the neighborhood plan, but it's hard to get around or whatever the scale and the mass of this sucker when you're looking at it. If you're staring straight at it across the street based on the pictures they put up there, I think it would look okay. But if you're driving east or west, I think as I can't remember who talked about coming in from the west, maybe it was Andrew. This thing's gonna be a big visual structure in what has traditionally been, for the most part, 2-story, maybe 3-story, handful of 3-story buildings. And while I'm absolutely positively in favor of high quality retail and office in this case that would be supporting the merchants downtown to a large extent, that one's a big pill to swallow in terms of the mass and scale of this thing relative to what else is downtown. And fortunately, I don't have to vote, so good luck with that.
Switch. Any further comments from the board?
I do. Things are changing in downtown Littleton. We now have a giant mass in the skyline of downtown Littleton. I like to call it Penny Plaza. And it's out of symmetry with how the rest of Littleton looks right now. So the size and the mass actually adds back a symmetry that is missing now that didn't used to miss. I think as a city, frankly, some editorial comments, I think we've generally failed at preserving the Carnegie Library view. There's a whole bunch of red tents in front of it, and it looks nothing like a library to me. So to whoever that's supposed to go to, customer service memo is, can we see the library again? I always thought this property should be a restaurant called Valley Feed, but I guess we can't do that. I think it would be cool.
Yes, it would be.
But apparently we can't have that in there. I do think requiring the HPV is essential, absolutely without question, and as much power as the HPP board has to make design considerations, I would not at all want this project to move forward without complete complicity with the HPP guidelines and rules, or whatever they call them, for that board. In terms of what it is here as a result of joining the Historic Preservation Board is I expect a gift. I expect this thing's going to be there for 100 years, and it's going to be just as beautiful as everything else we have. And anything short of that is not acceptable for the intent of what we're doing. I think the skyline in Littleton does matter quite a bit. I think the city of Littleton has a parking problem. I think it's the city of Littleton's problem. And I think the city of Littleton shouldn't burden a developer, certainly when it's producing something of good quality there. With that, there is that parcel right off Santa Fe that the city of Littleton, I believe, has an ownership stake in that I think is a perfect place for a parking garage that actually could maybe complement this development and maybe tie in. Certainly there's costs and money that's only a small portion mine that would have to be spent for that, but I think it would be there. Whether that otherwise parking should be designated around the Nevada site that's never going to get built. That seems like a nice place for a parking lot. Jose has a parcel that I'm sure he'd love to sell for a great price off Alamo. The mill site, the old mill, we can't seem to get a viable business in there. Maybe some good conversation needs to be had about what we do at that site. And maybe there's a tie-in, because it does tie into this whole west end of Littleton there. I'd like to I go back to the HPB thing, the side and the back, the style, the skyline, what Littleton is, how we look, how you fit is huge. And I would really want you to make sure that you match our style, meet our style, enhance our style, and make it better for what we've found. I think you're generally on the right path towards a gift for that. But and then sort of a final thought, I'd like to see the historic district be an all-inclusive district. I think we've passed enough time. I think any future development needs to make that happen, and that's my opinion. And I'm glad to see that you are complying with those ideas, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. You know, as I reviewed this, something that concerns me, that I read a lot about, you know, that I saw over and over again in the staff report, are statements, you know, that are not completely definitive. It may be justified. It generally meets the plan by aspiring for compatibility. So again, some of these elements are suggestive that it may, but doesn't necessarily meet some of the criteria that is set out by the various documents that we actually have the privilege and opportunity to compare to or evaluate from. So I do think we do, while there is some conflict that has come over time, perhaps, of some of these policies seeming to be outdated. That is exactly the purpose of things like design guidelines and downtown neighborhood plans that are more current to really suggest what it is that is intended for this space. And so with that, you know, the parking aside, which has been made very clear, it is not in compliance there. I also look at the downtown design guidelines, 5.3.1, sense of relationship with adjoining building. It does not, the adjoining buildings, it does not have, there is no consistency there. So I would say it does not meet that one. 5.2.2, sidewalks shall be uninterrupted. Again, here, while there are an allowance for the curb cutout, there is much as I stated earlier, this is actually a very tricky part of our traffic flow in downtown, and a very congested part of our traffic flow in downtown. And as you know, I drive through there, really anyone potentially coming in and out of that, and it's much more than what is happening in that corner now. They only have one way to go. They can't cross, you know, the 2 to 3 lanes if they're trying to get to the other part of town. They are forced really into the right lane and just keep going. So I just feel like there's going to be a lot of congestion that will happen there by the pattern of traffic and the limitation of what you can do when you get out of that parking lot. And of course, the risk or the interruption to the pedestrian environment that we're trying to create in all of downtown. In the citywide plan and the vision, we speak to respect and build upon the history, but yet here we are in fact demolishing, while not a building that is not in the historic district now. I wonder if with more diligence, interest, there may be some significance to that building. We just do not know as of now. So we can't necessarily make a decision based on that, but just overall, when looking at the character of what this building is, and while not directly adjacent to Carnegie Library, it's a very small little plot of land that separates this from the Carnegie Library. So I would suggest that when we look at these adjoining properties and whether it is preserving or helping to preserve those, I think we need to recognize it is right there. It does, there was a comment made that there is a desire and intent from our plans of encouraging mixed use and residential. We have those districts in downtown, and it is, we have a district called residential mixed use. So not unlike, Bruce's comment, this is a great development. I would love to see it somewhere else. And it probably does have a space somewhere downtown, just not on Main Street and not there so close to the Carnegie Library. And finally, downtown neighborhood plan. It's, one of the, it's stated both in the staff report and, pulling straight from the downtown plan, it states that one of the policies is to, and the first one that's mentioned is small town character. Downtown will retain its small town character as defined by its pedestrian scale, absence of tall buildings, intact neighborhoods, historic structures, diverse land uses, and enjoyable pedestrian environment. So there's, there's some things that it's meeting, some things that it's not, and I think at the end of the day, for me, I do feel that this is not preserving the intent and nature of what we want downtown, and in particular our Main Street character to be, and it is distracting from that. So that's my position on this. I will ask some clarifying questions to Kristen before we vote. We do have an amendment to the original motion to approve, so I believe we will vote on that first.
Correct.
Okay. And whether that is approved or denied, we will also move on the vote on the original motion.
Correct. So first you're going to vote on the amendment, and if that passes, then you'll vote on the motion as amended. And if it doesn't pass, then you're just going to vote on the motion. So
okay. Was that clear to everyone? So if the motion with the amendment is approved, then that's the final vote for the evening?
No.
No.
So let's just take this in steps. So we're going to vote on the amendment right now, which is to require review and election into the Main Street Historic District. And that's what you're voting on right now.
Okay, so if that's approved, the main motion would also be voted upon, and the main motion can be approved or denied?
Correct. So you're going to take two votes. But the first vote you're taking is just on the Main Street Historic District.
Okay.
So my suggestion is let's take that vote, and then we can talk about the next one.
Okay.
Before we do, can I offer a comment?
Yes, please.
So I've heard it said by several members from the community as well as up here, it makes no sense to me that we would have the buildings torn down and then have the ground put into the historic district. So for that reason, I'm opposed to the amendment, because I don't think that it just doesn't intuitively make sense. I think a great deal of thought has been put into the design and the character of the building you're proposing. It's fantastic. It's what downtown ought to see more of. You've heard that comment consistently. I think there's creative solutions. for addressing parking, bike racks, the light rail as a mitigating factor, I think is valid. The net versus gross consideration is certainly appropriate. But I think at the end of the day, this is a lot of square footage. We've heard a lot of comments about the massing of this building. Is it appropriate for that side of downtown Littleton being that big, that tall? For those reasons, it concerns me. Downtown Denver, there's buildings that are parked at 1 per 1,000. If there were a building being built in Colorado Springs, it's the city's obligation to provide parking, not the developers. So what a concept. I mean, the city of Littleton has a parking problem in downtown Littleton, and we're not solving that. We're expecting developers to. I think in that regard, it would be appropriate to stretch, but I feel like this is too big of a stretch in terms of the parking, and considering the massing of the building. So again, going back to my earlier point, I oppose the motion that's proposed, and I just feel like the parking and the massing of the structure is too much. So those are my thoughts.
Okay. So we are voting on a motion to approve Planning Board Resolution Number 15-2016, which approves the Plan Development Overlay Application for Mixed-Use Development 2679 West Main Street, amended to require the applicant to join the historic preservation, the Main Street Historic District.
So to clarify, you're not voting on the main motion, you're only voting on the amendment
The
right
amendment, okay, so we're voting on the amendment to require the applicant to join the Main Street Historic Preservation District.
now. Correct.
Okay.
Just the amendment.
All right, the vote is 4-3, and the motion passes.
Okay, now what we have on the table is the main motion, which is the motion to approve Planning Board Resolution Number 15, which approves the Plan Development Overlay Application for the proposed mixed-use development 2679 West Main Street.
Right, with the condition that you've already approved to join the Main
With the
Street
condition that
District.
has just been approved. Okay?
Again, it's 4-3, and the motion passes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we now go to public comment on non-agenda items. Let's see if, I do have a list. Okay, I have first Carol Brezak.
Carol Brezak, I live in the 4th District. I'm not going to be able to stay for your study session. I'm going to have to go to work, but I'm going to be listening. So I want to remind you to please use your microphones. That room, it's still not working very well. Last council meeting was very difficult at home. I mean, in the chamber, getting a text from my mother saying she can't understand anybody. I have met with a couple other citizens, and I'm not going to waste your time. I just want to let you know that when Don Brunn speaks to you tonight, and Robin speaks to you tonight, and Pam speaks to you tonight, that I'm in full agreement with all their comments, so I won't even waste my time doing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Pam?
Pam Chadbourne, I still live a block and a half from here. So I wanted to comment about the B2 changes that Planning Board considered at the last regular meeting. And Planning Board decided to not accept any of the proposed changes. I'm not sure you understood what that was about, and I'm going to talk about it, and actually relates to what happened tonight as well. So the Grove is being built across from the courthouse, and I don't think it's appropriate or right. In 2013, we had the appropriate and required public process for that. And we did not in 2015 for a lot of reasons that I never thought would happen in Littleton, but they did. So the B2 B2 zoning matters, and we're going to have more growths unless that is changed. And there is a reason that somebody proposed a moratorium, folks. It's because somebody behind the scenes, somebody we don't know about, has asked for this, at least one, maybe more. So there's an application. And unless we get B2 better, add setbacks, add height restrictions, do those changes, then we're going to have more growth. And I know that private property rights are important, but people have said this before. We all have property rights. I have property rights. I own property here, and code protects me. And it's your job to protect me and everybody else who owns property now. It's not your job to give away new stuff to new folks because they have a nice designer, they spent time. Really honestly, that's not what I expect you to do. I expect you to protect the rest of us as one of your first charges, and that almost never is mentioned. And that's a problem. So, board members, I wanted to say the discussion on B2 appalled me both times. To say that there's private property rights, we can't do anything without understanding the impact of the FAR and what you can really build. There's inherent restrictions on height and setbacks now because of the FAR. Let's find out what those are and codify them now during the moratorium. It may be too late for your action, I don't know, but I wanted to explain to you that doing nothing during the moratorium isn't what was best for Littleton. We need something because somebody's got another grove somewhere, and they'll get away with it unless we fix B2. Thanks for your consideration.
Thank you. Robin, I'm going to try. Schwarzbecker. Closer.
Robin Schwarzbacher, District 3. I'm concerned about the mineral station study. It is presented as if citizen input actually matters, and that different options were considered, and the best one is being presented. But that's not true. To explain what I mean, I'm going to read excerpts from the intergovernmental agreement between Littleton and RTD. From page 5, this plan needs to comply with the criteria described by the DRCOG and the RTD TOD policy. The parties wish to promote transit-oriented development sites. Page 9. The parties commit that they will make reasonable efforts to secure approvals to implement needed infrastructure improvements within their capital improvements program, adopt appropriate zoning code, master plan, and other regulatory changes, and incorporate plan recommendations into local ordinances, regulations, or requirements governing development of the plan areas. Page 23. The RTD Board of Directors adopted the following transit-oriented development policy as a framework to support TOD planning and development at existing and future stations. Definition of TOD: more compact and dense development around transit facilities comparing to existing development patterns in the same area, a mix of uses, usually residential, retail, and office employment. Sound familiar? Page 25, Goal 1, RTD will foster relationships to support transit station area planning and TOD implementation. Goal 2, encouraging local jurisdictions to adopt TOD supportive policies, plans, and zoning for the transit stations. Page 26, Goal 3, RTD supports multimodal access to the transit system in order of priority. Pedestrians, bus riders, bicyclists, and the very last on the list is vehicles. So you can see the only possible outcome has always been transit-oriented development, which never was conveyed to the residents of Littleton. Citizens are thinking the parking problem at the light rail station will be fixed, but according to RTD and DRCOG, vehicles are the least important aspect of this plan. It seems to be the fix is in and there's only one solution, TOD, transit-oriented development. In fact, it doesn't matter at all what's best for Littleton because we have no say in the matter. In the packet for your study session tonight are comments received during the several community meetings. I attended all but one and had the opportunity to leave comments and listen to what my neighbors had to say. I was dismayed to see that not all comments were included in your packet. In conclusion, I find the process quite nefarious because the residents are lulled into believing their comments matter and that the end results will incorporate them, so the area plan can be touted as what the citizens want. This is very disingenuous. The entire process seems to be a farce, because as the contract shows, transit-oriented development is the only outcome, period. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Don Brown?
Thanks again, Council, for the opportunity to comment. I want to talk about the mineral station plan. I first want to say I appreciate having had the opportunity to interact with every one of those gentlemen up there in the open house sessions that they've had, 4 of them, and it's been really good dialogue. But there are some concerns that I'd like to voice before the board, and the central issue is that the conceptual framework for this mineral station master plan appears to be insufficiently comprehensive to qualify really as a master plan, because most of what's going on is down here in red, actions, and actually looks more like a project plan, because all of the options are about urban development, all 3 of them. And one of the conversations I had just this afternoon was, is that it? Because it's basically a shell game of sliding around different types of intensive development. Isn't there something else besides intensive urban development? And the gentleman said, yes, there is, no action. But I said, well, that's not quite right, because everything there that's urban is way over here on this end of the spectrum of community character. And what about all of these other options in between here? Because it sits right up against natural open space. Sorry, I don't have that up enough so you can see that. So really, what's happened is we've jumped clear from green open space to urban, and none of those alternatives deal with this. But perhaps more importantly is, what about the questions of what are we doing to community character, and why are we doing this after all? Is it just to have intense urban development, transit-oriented development? Are we going to ever address what are we doing to community character, and why do we want to do this to begin with? In fact, to qualify as a master plan, we really need those things, because our objectives should be right up here under why. Our objectives should be, we're doing this to deliver these kinds of beneficial outcomes to the community and to avoid the adverse outcomes that the wrong kinds of actions down here require. And many of those outcomes are setting dependent. They depend on community character. So we have to go back to this question here. What are we doing to our community as regards community character? Where are the objectives? Where are the community character prescriptions? And then those actions, the only ones that should really be let out of the barn are the ones that achieve this and this. I'll have to say that in the 60s, the kind of planning that I was instructed, and I spent my career in planning, was right here. But that's simpleton planning.
I'm sorry, Don, your time is up.
What we have to do is this and this. If we're going to be responsive, thank you.
Thank you. David Brunt.
Good evening, Board. Thank you for having this opportunity to talk on the mineral station issue. I'm David Sprun of District 4. I'm a president of the Sunset 2 Homeowners Association and also trained as a landscape architect and urban designer. So I speak with a couple of different hats on. I've lived in the neighborhood for 12 years, and I've commuted to grad school and at CU Denver using the light rail. So I have experience walking this area. And I want to commend the conceptual design team on their work, on the thoroughness and thoughtfulness that they've expressed in their proposals. There are lots of pieces of the study, but I just want to comment on 3: setting a vision, making connections, and creating interactions. Setting a vision, I believe it's important to create a vision for this site to help guide what can be there. With hundreds of thousands of people moving into the metro area each year for the foreseeable future, growth is going to happen, and we need to guide where it happens and how it happens. I thank the board for taking on this issue and trying to figure out what's going on and what to make the place. Making connections is my second point. The mineral station is used by many in my neighborhood and the surrounding neighborhoods. And folks walk down to the station along dirt paths on the east side of Santa Fe and the railroad tracks and down slippery slopes. And I've fallen more than once as I've tried to make the train, messing up my clothes on the process. I think improving the paths along the east side of the tracks it would be a great improvement to the pedestrian and bike access to the station and to Aspen Grove. Also, the paths through and to the site should be designed to be accessible sidewalks and bikeways and connect to them both the neighborhoods to the station and both to Aspen Grove and the Greenway. It'd be a great addition to the neighborhood and to Littleton to have that opportunity. And lastly, the creating interactions. It's important to learn from the mistakes in transit-oriented development and not repeat them. The Inglewood Light Rail Station is a prime example. There, the parking garage is next to the station, but it's kind of off to the side, but the retail there is kind of off to the side compared to where the garages are, and so it's not as vibrant as it could be. It's important to have at least some of the retail between the station and the parking, serving vendors, commuters, and residents. I'm really pleased to see the idea of mixed use and residential in this area, as well as parking, and think it's an appropriate use for the site. It will serve to build community and support retail in the area. And in closing, I really think there's an opportunity here to shape a great place for Littleton. I'm pleased with the progress of the study team, and again, commend them for their work, and thank the board for taking on the planning of this site.
Thank you. Robert E. Lee. You good? Okay. And that's all I have on the list, but if anyone else would like to come up and speak? Okay. Okay. So I think that's all we have for a regular meeting. Motion to adjourn. Second?
So moved.
So moved. All right. Thank you. We'll vote. Thank you. We are done here. We are going to break for 5 minutes. We'll meet in the community room, and then we can have a discussion on how late we go tonight, I guess. Okay, I think we are ready to go. Thank you, Mark, for the knock. Okay, it's still August 22nd, and a little bit later in the day or evening for August 22nd, and this is our study session. And on the agenda tonight for study session is an update from Puma on the Littleton Mineral Station area plans. As some of you or many of you were at the community outreach meeting earlier today, so thank you for those that attended that. And looking forward to hearing maybe the latest that you guys got from that, but as well as a lot of other avenues that we've had for public input up until now. So I think I'm going to hand it over to Brad. Anything else, Jocelyn? We do have the advisory board or some members of the advisory board here as well that are joining us and are part of this with us here at the planning board. Yeah, okay.
Stop doing it.
For Carol. Good to go?
We're good to go.
Great, thank you. I am Brad Siegel. I've met you all on prior meetings. Thank you for making time for us this evening. Given the lateness of the hour, we're going to zip through a presentation to bring the planning board up to speed in terms of where we are with the mineral station plan. We have been working on this since almost the first year, so I think we used baseball terms last time. I think we were in the 7th inning the last time we were. And I think now we're probably in the bottom of the 8th. So I do want to acknowledge we have been working with an advisory committee in addition to touching base with City Council and the Planning Board. From RTD tonight at the table, we've got Kent Bagley, who's on the RTD board, and also Bill Schroy, who is with RTD as well. And then we have a couple other advisory committee folks who are sprinkled in the audience as well. I'm simply going to go over the agenda, and then I'm going to hand it to the project manager, JJ Folsom. And then we are also going to hear from Bill Vitek tonight on design issues. In terms of the agenda tonight, and again, we'll try to do this in light speed because this is information that many of you on the Planning Commission have seen before. We will review with you sort of the overview, why we're doing this, going back to the gentleman's why, what, and how. We'll review that why and try to bring some clarity to that. It has been a long and winding road with this project. I think we mentioned to you a couple months ago that we were really caught by surprise by the complexity of this project. When we started at the first of the year, and you look at a map at the station area, and you look at the adjoining properties, it is deceptively simple on a map. But we have found that this thing is layered, there's nuance, and that the community has been extremely engaged at a variety of levels moving forward. So there's a richness, there's almost a tapestry that's evolving through this process on this site. That we'll try to give you a good sense of tonight. So Bill will talk a little bit about the framework diagrams. We've actually gone maybe 270 degrees on the framework diagrams. I think we learned last month at a fairly contentious meeting that we had perhaps gone a little bit too far in terms of specific ideas. So we've actually pulled back a little bit, and we'll talk about that tonight. At our public forum earlier this evening, there seemed to be not only some receptivities for some of the newer concepts, but also almost a relaxed attitude that we had actually pulled back from being as specific as we were last month. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We do have some near-term recommendations. So while this is a long-term vision for the station area, the beauty of a process like this is we always come across what we call quick wins, or we think are some relatively easy, inexpensive things that the community can do to improve the area, particularly in connectivity, trails, bikes, walking. And we have some immediate recommendations that I think will be of value for the Planning Commission, City Council, other leaders. We'll also talk about how we go from the bottom of the 8th inning and bring this home in 9 innings, hopefully not extra innings, but we'll go in terms of the draft outline of the process moving forward from here. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, JJ Folsom, who will just remind us some of the why we're doing this and where we've been.
Thank you, Brad. So the project purpose here, why are we here? One thing that's really important to note is that we, as a team, as a city of Littleton, staff, planning board, city council, we are here to create a vision and a framework plan to guide future development surrounding the station. So that's our ultimate goal. So in doing that, we're looking at land use, circulation, open space, as a framework and a vision. So that is our purpose that we've been charged with here over the last year. So I'll briefly go through this. As Brad said, we're near the eighth, bottom of the eighth. So we're in that draft plan phase here. So we'll be sharing a little bit about what's going in the draft plan with you tonight, and then you will get the opportunity to review that over the next several weeks, and then ultimately come back in front of you and go through the council process with a likely review by council and hopefully adoption before Thanksgiving. Let's hope. That's the goal. Oops, going so fast here. I'm going to just briefly go through this. The site influences on this site. You've all seen a version of this diagram. It has not changed much. Quickly, open space, rivers and parks. This is one of the most unique sites in all of the fast tracks, not fast tracks, in all of the RTD station areas. Your proximity to the river, the views, the trail system that this station is adjacent to. Another influence, not necessarily a positive influence, the traffic, vehicular traffic. You have 50,000 plus cars a day on Santa Fe, 25,000 cars a day on Mineral. It's one of the reasons why we're here, why we do a station area plan, to try to get some of those people out of those cars and onto the rail system and into the buses as well. So with that comes connectivity. There are a lot of neighbors, a lot of people within walking and biking distance to this station, but it's very difficult to get to because of that Santa Fe barrier and the proximity. Even though the residents are very close as the crow flies, that outer circle there is a half a mile, very difficult to get to when you only have one overpass and an at-grade crossing of 6 to 8 lanes of traffic. And then land availability, another unique attribute of this site. You look at all this shaded salmon color area, you have over 100 acres of undeveloped land, most of it within walking and biking distance to this station. So very unique attributes to this station that we don't see. And we've worked on several station area plans throughout the metro area as well. So we've talked a lot about the vision. This has come out of meetings with our steering committee, several public meetings, open house meetings, as well as online surveys. Again, this is not new stuff here. So using that open space as an asset, the river, that's a major asset and a guiding force for this. So the train, obviously, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be doing a station area plan without the train. So leveraging that adjacency to the train, as well as the real estate asset that the Park and Ride brings. A town brand, so preserving and enhancing that character of Littleton. We heard a lot about that in the previous presentation about preserving the character of Main Street. How do we preserve that rural character while still maintaining some form of development? Connecting, very important one here, and improving as Brad mentioned, no matter what type of development happens out here, at a minimum, we want to see improved pedestrian, bicycle, transit, and vehicular access. We heard a citizen talk about those goals of a TOD plan, and that's it right there. And then the value capture. So this is something we'll talk about just in a couple minutes, but creating a special place that really leverages the environmental aspects of this site. I'll talk about that in a minute. I'll talk about it right now, actually. So so we did a market assessment for this site and looked at two different scenarios with that assessment. The first one being a market-driven scenario and the second one being a value capture. So what the market-driven scenario basically is what would the private sector do today? If we weren't doing a station area master plan, what would be developed out there today? Predominantly is what we're seeing throughout the Denver metro area. Multifamily housing, mid-level, from a cost standpoint, up to upscale 1 and 2 bedroom units. We're seeing it all over the Denver metro area at large rates. Retail, large format retail, and this is predominantly what this is talking about. What we would see, not just on the RTD site, but within that whole half-mile radius. So south of Mineral as well. Large format retail, commercial. There's a modest demand for grocery. We've heard a lot of people say they want grocery, but there are some within a few miles, but maybe smaller scale grocery. Restaurant and entertainment. Heard a lot of folks talk about that. But this is just back to the market. So what the market's telling us, office demand, we just say it's difficult to judge right now in kind of an unproven area. You have a fair amount of office to the south of you, to the south of the site, and to the east of the site. And as far as industrial goes, the South Park area provides probably all the industrial you need. So the next scenario is this value capture scenario. So this is really taking advantage of the natural attributes of this site. So this is if the city of Littleton is proactive in trying to attract various uses that want to be near open space, that want to be near a river, and create a truly signature TOD, a transit-oriented development. And some of the ideas there are, what if we could attract some sort of recreation manufacturer and / retailer? So for instance, a retail establishment or a kayak designer where they design and sell kayaks and you can go test them out on the river. Fly fishing equipment, same thing. Design, in-house, manufacture, and test and sell. I mean, what a great opportunity out there. So trying to attract, maybe not something to the scale of REI, but that type of company or business. But even one step further, somebody that actually builds the stuff on site, which REI does not do. We've also talked about, the possibility of a health and wellness campus, not necessarily a medical facility, but more like alternative lifestyle type of health and wellness, meaning physical therapy, not some of the other types of wellness that we know what Colorado's known for today. Not talking about that kind. And then I mentioned the following one, the outdoor retailers and testing amenities. So Also considering a reverse commute as part of this value capture. Right today, most people that are getting on the train are going north. They're going to work in Inglewood. They're going to work in downtown Denver. What if we were able to attract some of these types of uses that all those, the 8,000 to 10,000 millennials moving here a month, depending on what numbers you look at, that are moving to downtown Denver or somewhere along the corridor. What if we're able to attract some of those people out here to work? So that reverse commute, where people are coming to Mineral Station for these recreation type manufacturing uses and jobs. So this is my last slide, and then I'm going to hand it over to Bill. So you had asked, Karina, if we could share some of what we heard tonight. So I actually was the facilitator at the pedestrian and bike framework station, as well as the open space station. And I could say as much, this is the station where we have a lot of people in agreement on a lot of these ideas, and I'll just talk about some of those. Connectivity is what I've been talking about. So connecting to the South Platte River Trail, we are talking about creating a framework and a plan where all these dotted lines on here are new trail connections. All the solid lines are existing trail connections. So I'll start from south to north. So the opportunity of connecting to the Highline Canal Trail, which kind of winds around here and stops at McClellan Reservoir. There's opportunity to connect that trail under an existing culvert. So you have the Dad Clark Gulch, which goes under Santa Fe today. Would not be that difficult to build a bicycle and pedestrian path underneath Santa Fe. It'd be incredibly difficult when you don't have that existing culvert. And then continuing that trail along your existing city ditch, which runs along the entire length of this, through the length of this property, all the way up to Mineral. And a long-term idea is maybe a potential underpass at Mineral, but the short-term idea, and we've talked to South Suburban about this, is continuing this trail on the east side of Mineral down to the river, where you already have an existing gravel path that goes under Mineral. All you would need to do is pave that and then make this connection to the South Park River Trail. So just look at this connection. You would be able to get all the way from the South Park River Trail to the Highline Canal Trail, in addition to making a direct connection or a connection to the rail station from future development that happens south of Mineral. So that's just one of many connections. Another one we talked about a lot with that particular neighbors in the Jackass Hill neighborhood, of making a connection along an already existing path, which is a maintenance road for the Union Pacific, that connects up to Jackass Hill Park and then on to, again, to the Highline Canal Trail. So just those two improvements would connect this entire neighborhood and this entire neighborhood to the station and to the South Platte River. Also talked about a lot of just smaller internal connections, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into those details. So I can say gladly, particularly after our last open house, it was a pleasure to hear so much positive feedback on the pedestrian, bike, and open space connections here. So now I'm going to pass it on to Bill, and he's going to walk you through some of the other diagrams. Probably don't need to spend much time on that, since I just, yeah, right.
Okay, all right, great. Good evening, I'm Bill Vitek. I'm a land planner and landscape architect. I'm with the firm of Dig Studio, and we're a subconsultant to the Puma team on the planning and landscape architecture urban design components of this project. So I want to emphasize something that kind of JJ started with, and he did a great job in terms of talking about the connectivity moves. All of these next series of diagrams that we're going to be looking at really focus, I want to highlight this word framework, because that's really what we're intending to kind of establish or provide a vision for, is a framework vision in this whole overall exercise. And so, although at the last meeting we did do some, what we would refer to more as detailed test fits in terms of what types of development and densities of development and amounts of development could occur, really the end goal of this is to establish this overall framework plan that looks at basically 4 component pieces. And JJ already touched on the first one, which is connections and gateways. The second one I want to touch on is the open space framework. And by open space, we mean that green, the green areas that are the connective tissue, if you will, both to the Platte Greenway as well as back into the neighborhoods. So what we're primarily addressing in the open space framework is saying that and JJ alluded to it a little bit, that the city ditch easement that runs through here is where, if you've driven down Santa Fe, it's where a lot of the big old cottonwood trees are. Some of those are beyond their prime, but as an element that has to be kind of maintained into the south half of the overall study area, that we think it provides a great connectivity up into the north half of where the RTD site is here itself. And I'm sorry if I didn't orient everybody here. This is the station itself right here. Here's Aspen Grove, Mineral, and Santa Fe. I'm sorry, Santa Fe and Mineral. And the existing alignment to South Platte Parkway right here. So again, as a framework, JJ talked about all the connections, but this kind of spine of a green space that could be a part of, or could be a recreated, in a sense, city ditch connecting north to south, we think is an important, bigger open space move throughout the overall study area. And then the second framework component is the streets. And so obviously the existing streets are the ones here in purple, in the solid purple. And what we're proposing, framework of streets, are these purple dashed lines right here going south, as well as in the current RTD site itself. And just a little bit about that, what we're saying here is that specifically as it relates to the existing development of Aspen Grove, the existing apartments that are along the Greenway, that a finer grain of a sense of a block pattern makes more sense north of Mineral, so that we're creating, in a sense, the logical connections for both bus and vehicular transportation, as well as enhanced pedestrian connectivity to the station itself. Rather than walking through a parking lot to get to the station, envision this more as walking down a street to get to the station. And so that's what we're trying to create in this finer grain right here, is this series of streets that could connect east-west to the existing South Platte Parkway, and then even potentially connect north up into Aspen Grove and make this connection from the kind of the existing internal road of Aspen Grove south into this TOD area where the station is itself. And then to us, it made sense to continue to focus on the intersection at South Platte Parkway and to make that the logical extension south, coming and going all the way down to Otero, where CDOT has, in their long-range plans, has approved a signalized intersection. So rather than, in a sense, we looked at different options, a whole series of different loops, or even like a frontage road concept, we felt it was a more logical move and a more connective move between north and south to create this parkway experience that works in tandem with the city ditch, which we just talked about a minute ago, as kind of a broader parkway experience that could be this connective spine road, if you will, going from north to south, aligning with the intersection points, obviously at South Platte Parkway, as well as in Otero, and then looking at limited movement intersections. Again, this comes from the CDOT study at Nichols at this point right here. So that's the second component piece of the framework plans. And then the third piece is really talking about, in a sense, land use areas and kind of buildings, frontages, and activation. And that's highlighted here in these kind of different pink colored areas that you begin to see taking shape. And again, we focus really primarily more on the north side here about where we want buildings to address the street. And where we want buildings to, again, create these street connections that can funnel people to the transit station, and then also look at how a development pattern might occur, thinking about the fact that in order for development to occur in parcels in the north half here,
that you'd have to take what is currently all surface parking lot and probably put it into one primary structure in the center right there. So that would be a structure, and this is a huge next step in understanding the study and what can really be achieved, but would be the economics of what it costs to build a structure like that. But it would certainly replace one for one the existing surface parking that is currently on the site, then also help provide some additional parking for adjacent development land uses that might surround that in the long term. So that really, these colors really begin to, the more magenta color indicates more of an activation use, whether that's retail or front porches of residential, but in a sense, really active uses of buildings that begin to address the street and create vibrancy and eyes on the street and that sense of a walkable pedestrian environment. A couple things just to point out from these series of precedent images that we have here is that there are many creative ways to wrap parking structures with retail or residential, or in fact, and this is another mixed-use example, this is up in Boulder, parking structure is actually behind, but you have retail on the ground floor and residential above. So when we're talking about this kind of symbolization here around the parking structure, we're not talking about just a freestanding parking structure, but one that would actually be wrapped with active uses around the outside, making it attractive from an aesthetic standpoint. So just a little bit on the south in terms of mineral, we do feel that it's important, again, in this the notion of a prominence of the parkway to create, in a sense, a corner here at the edge of South Platte Parkway and Mineral. And by that, we mean bringing buildings that come to the corners. So again, we get a presence of buildings forming streets rather than entry roads into parking lots and buildings tucked far behind. So that's what some of this symbology begins to suggest, certainly on the north half, and then how we begin to address that on the south portion as well. One other thing, if there's been one thing that's been unanimous in terms of all the feedback we've gotten, and it's been an interesting cross-section of obviously do nothing to provide as much parking as you possibly can and provide, a whole mix of uses. One thing that has been very consistent is that whatever occurs in these areas of both the RTD site and north of Mineral and the south site is that development should probably be limited to 3 to 4 stories in height. And approximately there's 64 feet of grade change from where the park edge is here all the way up to the adjacent residential developments on the bluffs further back here that sit above the light rail and the freight rail line right here. So in any scenario, in that limit of thinking about buildings and massing of a 3 to 4 story height, we would have still, which are probably in the maybe 40 to 50 foot range at the maximum. With this 65 foot of change, we'd always still be preserving this kind of long view across the tops of all these to the mountains to the west. So again, I think that's been one thing that this section is illustrating that we believe as a planning team, and certainly what we've heard from the community, that this certainly preservation of long mountain views is something that's very important in the long term, regardless of what happens here. And then a couple quick, this is a cross section of that street that we're talking about on the north side of Mineral. Just a very, it's pretty standard 80-foot section from building face to building face. Creating ample room for sidewalk, a tree, amenity, seating zone, parking on both sides, which helps activate the street edge, accommodating multi-modes by having designated bike lanes, and that's again what some of this precedent imagery begins to delineate right here is how that can happen in a very still limited cross-section, but an effective way to still get multimodal transportation, on-street parking to activate edges, and ample zone for sidewalk and pedestrian circulation. And I think I'm going to turn it back over to JJ here.
Thank you, Bill. So another thing we've had a lot of agreement on in our community outreach is some of these near-term recommendations. Some of them are quick wins, not all of them. Brad talked about, kind of the low-hanging fruit. A big one that we've heard without even pointing out on this slide is wayfinding. It's very difficult for people, particularly newcomers to the neighborhood or new users to the mineral station, to find their way around. So when one gets off the train, it's not even apparent, where the connection is to the South Platte River Trail or the Carson Nature Center or Aspen Grove. You're kind of just left on your own to just wander through the parking lot. And as we've seen a lot of in our site analysis walks out there, there are what we call use trails, cow paths, trails that just come about from people walking. There are several going into Aspen Grove. There are a few. There are several through the dirt parking lot for obvious reasons, and then even over by the Carson Nature Center, up on Jackass Hill. There's about 3 or 4 different ones that people are regularly using. The gentleman Dave that spoke earlier talked about falling down this hill on his commute to work. Some of the quick wins here are formalizing those trails. We know where people are walking by looking at the use trails, so let's come in and formalize some of those. So, for instance, the connection down Jackass Hill on that railroad easement, that one would be a very inexpensive fix to pave that trail and then ultimately make the connection down to the light rail station, so it really opens up this neighborhood. Another one of those quick wins is making improvements to the intersection at South Platte Parkway to the Carson Nature Center. Sorry, I was pointing at the wrong dot. Right now, that's a pretty, not just from the Nature Center, but also from that unpaved surface parking lot into the paved lot. Very difficult crossing. There's actually still an existing barbed wire fence out there. Remove the fence, potentially pave the parking lot, or put some sort of surface treatment down that's better than dirt that gets really muddy in inclement weather. Another one is looking at, I mentioned it previously, really studying the opportunity to make that bicycle pedestrian connection on Dad Clark Gulch underneath Santa Fe, and then ultimately making this connection up to the Highline Canal Trail and some form of trail, whether it's paved or just a hard surface trail like the East Trail next to the river, something that people can walk and bike ride on to be able to connect this neighborhood all the way up to the station and ultimately up to Aspen Grove. A fourth one is making the connection to Aspen Grove. So on the east side, there's about a 12-foot difference of grade from the Aspen Grove parking lot up to the RTD parking lot. But Bill and his outfit has looked at that. And that grade could be made up with a long path, and you can see the distance here. There's enough space there to make that connection, so people could be walking to and from the light rail platform directly to Aspen Grove, not having to go through the existing parking lot at a diagonal, which is what people do now, as I mentioned, with all these use paths on the other side. So those are several near-term recommendations. Oh, one more here. So just west of the South Park 2 neighborhood, there's actually an existing dirt road that connects down to some uses in here. That is a potential walking and bike trail connection to get you up to Mineral Avenue here. So those are some of the near-term recommendations, and all of these could happen regardless of what type of development or redevelopment happens on the RTD site and on the site south of Mineral Avenue. Okay, so this is I think I have 2 more slides. So here, as Brad mentioned at the beginning, so as part of our agenda, so we are now in the process of writing the plan. We have taken in a ton of public input from meetings, from the online surveys, nextdoor.com, so a variety of engagement efforts. So now we're drafting the plan. So this is basically the table of contents of a plan that's almost written. So looking at the process, the vision, what's the vision for this area? Going through all of those existing conditions. So we've looked at all of there's several previous studies for this site. The Urban Land Institute did a study. Identifying those assets and challenges and opportunities that I showed some of those to you. We also have a pretty extensive market assessment summary that you all have, or that most of you have reviewed, and certainly our steering committee has reviewed. So that market-driven scenario and that value capture scenario, we go into a couple pages of detail on what those mean. Of course, the vision, those vision statements that I put up earlier, and then the plan there, along with that vision goes these planning frameworks and principles. And then all those diagrams that we presented, we'll be refining those based on further feedback that we hear, and looking and dividing those, the framework diagrams into a public realm and a private realm. So the public being those vehicular transit, open space, pedestrian, wayfinding, and then on the private realm, talk about building types. So residential uses, light industrial, office, urban design, not getting into the details, certainly not designing the buildings or even what they look like, but just talking about what is the vision for all of those type of uses. And then there'll be an implementation section. So how do you pay for all this stuff? There's a lot of ideas out there. How does all this get done? So we'll be talking about public-private partnerships. RTD is obviously a key player since they own the predominant piece of property. Looking at private development opportunities to the south, and how the city, RTD, and private ventures can all partner up to make development happen out here. And then districts, providing a variety of options for you on different types of districts, parking districts, metro districts. There are several. Zoning and I skipped that one. Zoning and policy recommendations. So what does the city need to do to get this whole area in place for whatever type of development can happen out here? And then all the background materials throughout the whole process will be in an appendix. So we held a developer forum earlier in the summer, got some input from local developers on what they think could happen out here. All the stakeholder and community and focus group input will all be part of this, and then the full market assessment will be in that appendix. So you might ask, well, what are the next steps? So right now, we are writing that document that I just showed you the table of contents for. In September, we'll be continuing to refine that. We'll make more refinements to these framework plans and diagrams. Tentatively coming back to you for a study session to review that draft plan, get that to you ahead of time. We're still working out those details. And then most likely an October or November final council adoption. So that's the schedule as of today. So things have changed along this process, but we'll see. So now we'd like to open it up to you all for questions and discussion. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Yes, Mr. Bagley.
Could you, JJ, could you shift back to the two options, the market-driven and the value capture?
Yes.
Slide? Because I just want to make a comment about that so that everybody understands that from my perspective and say, the market-driven scenario and the value capture scenario, stationary master plan means a big surrounding area, not just the little piece that RTD owns.
Correct.
So a lot of what we're talking about here talks to the rest of the development, especially along the south side of Mineral and on the west side of Santa Fe.
Correct.
That's what those two concepts of value capture and market-driven relate to. So everybody should understand that as a component of
that. Is absolutely correct. So not just the 12 or 14 acres of the RTD property,
so
but the 100 acres south of Mineral. Correct.
One of the thoughts that I have, because I know there's very little, if any, mention tonight about the three scenarios that were done.
Right.
Because the decision was to keep it at the framework level, but I don't think you should
those shouldn't be thrown away. Those should be in an appendix if you want to.
Oh, yes.
From my perspective.
Correct.
I mean, that's up to the planning, is it a commission or a board now?
Still board.
Still a board.
Don't waste your time on what it is.
We already have.
That's an inside joke. You know, that's up to the planning board and the council, but I think throwing those away does a disservice to the opportunity to at least see what the different options could be, potentially, because it's just a concept.
Correct, correct.
There's no zoning involved in any of this. As I mentioned to everybody, because you talk about the auxiliary parking lot, which is really recycled asphalt.
Right.
I've gotten pressure forever about paving it. It's a $2.7 million project to make that a regular parking lot. And part of the reason that it's never been done is because this needed to happen.
Right.
A stationary master plan, funded by DRCOG through the city of Littleton. So, I mean, that's not a cheap thing.
No.
We aren't going to do any, when I say we, I'm speaking for RTD.
Right.
But it has to be done, the drainage has to be improved, the access has to be improved, the grades have to be done. So, I mean, it's not a cheap project to do.
Right. And
So I
that
just wanted to-
$2.7 million could be spent many other
2.7.
ways on these trail connections.
Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, you talk about the near-term recommendations from my perspective, and I don't disagree with them, but that means there's a commitment on the part of the city of Littleton and this city council to start funding the stuff that we're talking about and where they're going to get the money to fund this.
Right.
So that is not related to the sale of property or anything like that. So I just wanted to bring those as a real commitment by the city of Littleton to buy into what's going on.
Right.
So thank you for
Thank you, Ken.
2.5 minutes. Thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments from anyone? I know it's late in the evening.
What I find really good is, for the first time, I've seen the chapters. I've been looking for that. Thank goodness. Because all we've been focusing on for the longest time in written form is that market assessment.
Right.
Now I can see the rest of the book.
Yeah.
And the chapters and the appendices. Wonderful.
And in the next 2 weeks, you'll see an entire document.
Yeah.
A novel? Hopefully not.
So we're going to try to keep it short and sweet, but it's
I know.
it's a little lengthy.
And, you know,
I mean,
and
you
I
look at all those chapters, it's hard to.
And that's exactly why, you know, what Mark is saying, this is something we really pressured Jocelyn, and I'm sure you felt that pressure too, that we've been hearing a lot of information, a lot of content, et cetera, but where does this all land?
Right.
And that's what that has finally done for us, is now we see what will come out of it, so that content and that context that you've given us, we know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And how to think about it.
Right.
I have, I'll come back to, the why, what, and how. And I think, in fairness, I think what's maybe not articulated well, coming back to the project purpose, it's to shape the land use circulation and open space on and around the Mineral Station Park and Ride to do what? To accomplish what or to avoid what? And I think that's, this is what we're going to do maybe, but it's like for what purpose? And we have it, but we're calling it a vision. So maybe I'd like to ask you to take a stab at how to continue this sentence that allows you to kind of consolidate this vision and what are we really trying to accomplish here?
Yeah.
And it may sound something like create an environment to capitalize on visitors to this area of Littleton. And so I think that's how this sentence needs to, be completed. So that when we get to the vision gives us a little bit more to read into each element of it.
Yeah, great. Appreciate that. So yeah, when you look at our table of contents, so, the introduction, the background will be the why. The what is kind of all, the vision, the frameworks, the diagrams, And then the how is when we get into this implementation section. How do we make all this come to fruition?
Just in the interest of 2 cents, I like that market scenario, value capture scenario slide you have. We want to steer you far away from the market, not from the sense that we're not interested in the economic impact of that. We are 100%. We want the money and a blank piece of land. That would be kind of cool.
Right.
But the trick would be, how do you take that value capture scenario and turn it into a market feasible opportunity? I think that's beyond the scope of what you guys are doing, other than to say that's possible. But if you had examples of places that you studied that have done something like that, all of us want Disneyland concept in our mind for whatever that means.
Right.
And Disneyland for outdoor recreation,
Sure.
we live in. How do we capitalize that for this parcel in a way that adds direct benefit to Littleton, that gives us some form of defense against a developer who just sees a piece of land without creativity? I don't want you to lose. I think you're capturing it, but I don't want that to go away. It just, the first sentence of our comp plan says we must rebel against becoming suburbia. That market-driven thing just screams suburbia. And we want to stay far away.
Let me add a comment or two to that, because it's kind of a big thought. And it really suggests, and this is a question really for the board and also for the council, but it suggests, are we going to be passive or are we going to be engaged as a city in what happens here? And I think we're suggesting that a passive approach is that market-driven approach. And I think what's fortunate is on the RTD side, I think the community has time. You've got the benefit of time. We think it's highly unlikely in this development cycle that something is going to radically transform the RTD site. However, in the remainder of the study area, and we haven't talked about Aspen Grove, that's another factor here, is Aspen Grove is a major player, and whether it's Aspen Grove or whether it's South of Mineral, there are probably stronger market forces there at play that are going to require engagement by Littleton sooner than later. So we do want to give you some tools that could help you shape what happens, both South of Mineral and also Aspen Grove. We'll give you an outline of that. We know there's some limitations in Littleton. Littleton is has its own unique personality, personalities too. We've learned, but there's some special district options. There's some others that could be really useful and employed proactively by the city that could help meet that objective, that could really shape something that is not routine, is not the market dictating Littleton, but is really Littleton helping to influence that and create something special.
And I think we've already answered that question. So the question of, are we going to be passive or engaged? And in our plan, in our citywide plan, we, specifically called out transformation as a key desire and initiative of ours. And this is one of those areas that we definitely see as transformative for the city of Littleton. So I think, at least from my point of view, and as the planning board has spoken about this, supported by council, based on that document that already states that we intend to be transformative. So I think it's definitely wanting to be engaged. Yes, sir.
Yeah, let me just support what you said, because I think within the context of the way it's written, the whole issue of the market-driven versus the value capture component being transformative, you need to say, if the city of Littleton really wants the value capture option about what happens around this station, they have to be significantly engaged monetarily. You may not say it that way, but and policy-driven. Without that change and without that commitment, as Mark knows, this sits on the shelf for another 20 years. And we're back here with different people in the year 2036.
And let me add,
We'll hire you again.
engaged in a variety of scenarios. Not everyone, I mean, there's a lot of residents that we talk to that we heard some of it tonight, that are not assuming that this is going to be developed. There were a lot of individuals who would love to see it be connected to the open space or have more recreational value, which are all valid visions for this site. But that, again, will require engagement. But in terms of coming up with resources to do that, if it's private property, there's a cost to influencing that. So regardless of the vision, whether it's the traditional transit vision or if it's more of a vision that we really want to celebrate and expand the open space, a whole variety of these alternatives will require engagement and will not happen, again, as we've been discussing, if we just let the market sort of do its thing.
Brad, as you stated that, what comes to mind, or what I'm trying to think through, is we have this vision, and we have many elements to it, and this would suggest we're trying to balance each of them equally. But in some ways, what you're suggesting is maybe it's not an equal balance. If what we're hearing from the public in a significant way, and where we feel Littleton will engage, is to further preserve, further enhance the recreational element of this, further enhance the open space, then it really focuses on the river being the first and most important, and do nothing. I mean, if we do nothing else, this is what we will protect and enhance, which then just kind of, I would look at this as 80% the river, and then, we'll help support RTD, will help. So I don't know that we've gotten that clarity from a vision perspective.
Is that the right order? Somewhat.
Well, we got a little bit of apples and oranges going on here, because the river, the train, the town brand, or the essence of Littleton, I think are those vision pieces. The connect, I think, is related. The value capture gets more into the how, though, how you achieve the vision. I think what's interesting to me about this vision is it really does capture the complexity of this site. Because what we've heard, if you put all the resident comments together and throw them in the blender, basically they want all that. They want the river, and they want the recreation, and they love that type of asset. But then they said, well, wait a minute, we realize the train is there, and we want to take advantage of that. And then Littleton, there's this small town piece. We've heard also there's a fairly significant constituency that is accepting of development. But again, the value capture thing is supreme. I don't think anybody remember when we started this, we had, the big box we will not name, was basically what we were talking about for a few months. There is such consensus about what we don't want, but it leaves us with these values of what we do want. And then how do we come up with something that does all of this? I think is going to be the challenge moving forward. It's again, it's more complex than it seems.
I don't envy the person that's writing this. Is this being written by committee or by a person that, one of the disciples or something?
Well, we're working very closely with staff, and there will be revisions. I think you may not see it for a few weeks, because it is not. It's not a simple thing to put together. And then ultimately, as it goes through planning and as it goes through council, it will be revised. But I do think the vision statements, these principles are sound, and that you can build a plan around this vision. And the complexity, to me, in some ways, adds richness to it.
Can you briefly speak to land use? So there is going to be a section for land use. And, you know, we of course, it's easy to talk about, everybody wants the bike path, and that's, you know, you shared with us a lot of what's in the public realm, because that's obviously what we can influence as well. And we also heard on the private realm what we definitely don't want. So can you give us an indication of what you've been hearing? I know what they do want, so we know what we don't want. What do we want?
It's a lot, as Brad kind of talked about, it's all over the map. I mean, we're here, there's a few very vocal people that don't want anything, don't want change. Why can't we just make it open space? So I've explained, and I had to do that this evening. Well, why would you be willing to tax yourself to spend $30+ million to buy open space? And one person said, yeah, let's take it to a citywide vote, and we'll see if we can tax ourselves to buy that property and make it open space. That's a couple people. So there are also several folks that have said, boy, it sure, and one of them spoke this evening, boy, it sure would be great if I could get off the train or while I'm waiting for the train, get a cup of coffee right there, not have to walk 15 minutes or 10 minutes next door, or get off the train and pick up my dry cleaning, or go to a meal, or go have a beverage on a rooftop patio. You know, we've heard that side of it too. Other uses, jobs. Several people have, you know, in some of our earlier meetings when we were talking about, and I talked about in the presentation, that potential of a reverse commute. Wouldn't it be great if the city of Littleton could attract several hundred or even several thousand jobs out here? What an opportunity that would be. So several people have provided that type of feedback. Housing. We've heard a lot about housing all over the spectrum. Some people have said, wow, I wish that 100 acres south of Mineral could be single-family homes. And we've heard several other people say, no, this is an opportunity to create some density or a variety. Can we provide a variety of housing and for sale housing, and not just single family for sale housing? I know we have the construction defects issues, but townhomes. Several, a lot of the folks we've talked to are of, retirement age, and some of them have said it sure would be great if my kids could move back to Colorado and live down the street. Is there opportunity for first-time home buyers or even young professional renters to live in this area? We heard a lot of people talk about senior housing, senior market rate housing, and senior affordable housing. Wouldn't that be nice to be able to have a senior housing project in walking distance to a light rail station, so you can hop on the train and go to Inglewood and go to Lodo and go to a baseball game, go to a football game, and not rely on that automobile, and be able to walk to all the things you need. A lot of daily uses are already in Aspen Grove. There's lots of restaurant opportunities, a bookstore, coffee shop. My mom, elderly mother, goes to the Apple store. So you have a lot of those daily uses already. So it's hard to say. We've heard the whole spectrum, and oftentimes that we saw at the last meeting, it's only a few vocal folks that dominate a meeting and talk about what we don't want to hear. But then when we go into these groups and have the one-on-one sessions, or you read online, you hear a lot more comments of positive comments on what type of elements people want to see out here.
JJ, can I just add one thing to that, Karina, maybe to your specific question about land use? First of all, I want to applaud the planning board for just listening to the discussion earlier about the downtown project. I mean, what struck me about that is you were truly embracing a vertical mixed-use scenario, retail on the ground floor, office, and then residential. And that is, I think, the type of progressive thinking that you need to think about when you're talking about land uses at a transit-oriented development site. So the fact that you're embracing those issues and having the good debate, I think is you're to be applauded for that. And I would say that a couple things about this site specifically relative to the mix of uses is two component pieces to that. This site opened 16 years ago, Bill, right? 2000. And I remember the big debate was, gee, is anybody going to use it? They got this big parking lot. I bet no one's ever going to park there, What are we doing this for? And so unfortunately and unfortunately, it's used tremendously. On the other hand, it was a site that was truly, when it started, in a sense, a park and ride. It really wasn't thought of as a TOD. In fact, TOD was probably not a big part of a planning nomenclature, 16, 20 years ago when this first line was being thought of. Fast forward to recent fast tracks and all the developments and all the different lines. I mean, you wouldn't think about, the line to Boulder or to the Gold Line or whatever, or the line out, the A line out to the airport, without thinking in a holistic way about the development around those stations themselves, not just as park and rides. So there's kind of back to Brad's point about the complexities of what we're dealing with, it's kind of trying to shift a mind shift here of that parking lot's always been there, what's wrong with the parking lot? And to get people to thinking differently about how transit-oriented development and how land use, density, and mixes of uses have evolved in the last 15, 20 years. And so I would just say that I think we encourage you to think openly about that. I think there'll be a lot in the policies and recommendation about that. And not just specifically for the RTD site, but the south site as well, in terms of thinking differently about a mix of uses. I mean, there's a PUD on that site today, right? It's 30 plus years old. It's really kind of archaic in terms of how it was laid out and what those uses are and are not allowed, given, a more visionary thinking about how transit is truly utilized and integrated into a community today. So I don't know if that helps to answer your question or not, but I guess to land use, it's certainly more integrated and more vertically thinking than it is about, I'll say, a very traditional, kind of a suburban approach. So.
Okay. We did go past our 10 o'clock mark where I should have asked you how much longer you'd like to go. Is there any final comments? Okay. Jocelyn?
Just one final thing as far as next steps on the meeting, the open house this afternoon. We will post all that information tomorrow, hopefully, up on Littleton Plans. It will be there. Sometimes it takes us a bit just technically to get stuff formatted correctly, but to give people an opportunity to further comment. And that'll be up for about a week and a half or so. And then capturing all those comments so that then we can bring the draft plan back to planning board for a study session. So those are the next steps.
Okay, great. All right, well, thank you everyone for coming out tonight and hanging out a little bit longer. And thank you, great work. It's, what we were hoping to see tonight is that kind of next step and what that document could look like. So appreciate that.
Thank you
All right.
very much.
Good night, everyone.
Sleep well, everybody.